Hello, I am the Fightin Kentuckian, and I'm here with,
Wyndehurst Productions.
and we're back after a long hiatus with another great episode of the On Patrol podcast slash YouTube channel video. We're on episode 26, and today we've got an amazing guest in store for you with the Yorkshire Gamer. And so, episode 26, we're going to be diving into the big game. And we're going to talk about a lot of stuff in the hobby, but we're going to centrally focus on the big game and what is the big game? How do you get into it? How do you avoid pitfalls about it? And the water's fine, why you should come in and try to pursue the big game, even if you're one of those skirmish gamers out there. I won't say that too loud in case Yorkshire's listening right now. But as with all our episodes, I'll kick it over to Wyndehurst for our intro section.
Yep, thanks, Kentuckian. So we always like to start it off with alibis, caveats, and piggybacks. And obviously, the reason we have this is this exact here. So where were we for the last month? We didn't have an episode. So if you do happen to follow us on Facebook, which I recommend if you don't, because that's where we can post things like, hey, we're going to have to miss this month, or this month is going to be late. Obviously, we both just moved. I moved from across the globe, and Kentucky moved from across the country. And that's just the nature of the military. We have to get reset up, find houses, move our collections, get everything set up, and we just couldn't pull it together without offering a subpar product. And we're not going to do that. Even the last episode 25, we record twice because the venue we were recording initially just wasn't working out. There was bad internet, and we weren't going to push a bad product. So if we can't push you all a good episode, we're not going to do it. So we decided last month we had to take a break. We usually skip a month every year. We've already skipped one because of the PCS process. So you can expect 2 episodes this month. The other one will be coming out right towards the end. But we do apologize if you were looking forward to hearing us this last month and you didn't know because you don't follow us on Facebook, but that is usually where we put that stuff. We didn't have any big comments or anything that I recall from the last episode, other than a lot of people really were interested in Blood Red Skies. So for me, that was a big caveat, moving across, from the UK all the way to Middle America, South Dakota. Last episode 25, I was still in lodging, and I just moved into the house pretty much at the beginning of this month. So Kentuckian, alibis, caveats, piggybacks for you.
No, Elite Pursuit podcast, guys. NashCon is going on right now, and currently I think it's ending. They host another tournament. I think all things Blood Red Skies should really go to them. They are so helpful. We talked about that in the episode. We wanted to do kind of an intro approach to what we thought about the rule set as casual, I'd say, Blood Red Skies players slash played it a few times prior to before and at decent levels. But really highly loved talking to those guys and kind of getting ready for our foray into it. And then they gave us some great kind of feedback in some YouTube comments and other places about, things that you could also look into that would help anybody that's Blood Red Skies curious. Same thing with the move. Huge transition. If you follow our pages, we're getting our hobby room set up. We're getting ready to get out there and look, and get out, I would say, and start going to our local stores and playing at our houses. So look forward to the more comments. If you're in our areas, so in Virginia or out there in the Midwest, where Wyndehurst is at, in between nothingness. No, I'm kidding. But if you're at any one of our locations, and again, just kind of follow the pages, love to get tied into groups or historical war gamers. And we will drive to play games, or we'll happily host you. I think both of us have that kind of aspect of it. So look forward to meeting new people and being involved in new clubs. The only other thing that I want to say is it's been a busy summer, man. We really tried to fight through some of the friction of the transition and the moves to get other episodes, but with PCSs, trips, jobs, everything demanding, and trying to be good husbands and fathers. It's definitely demanding, and we wanted to make sure, as Winhurst said, we're not going to push out a crappy product. In our opinion, right? You might think, oh, they think that's polished, bunch of idiots. But no, we really look forward to this episode and talking to Yorkshire Gamer and kind of digging into the big game. I think it will be awesome, and I hope that you give his channel a look and a check out. His genuineness comes through at all parts, and he's just a great individual, great light bearer in the hobby. So without further ado, please grab your sword, your shield, your spear, your musket, your rifle, your belt-fed machine gun, and join us on this episode of On Patrol. So we're here with the Yorkshire Gamer. Kim, we truly appreciate you being here and taking the time to talk to us today. You have a rich history in the wargames hobby, and you're at the forefront of bringing the big game back to the tabletop. You're an award-winning game master and podcast YouTube host who picked up the mic and camera during the pandemic and brought back large armies and table sizes to the forefront of the hobby. With over 190K listens, was that correct, Ken?
Yeah, 192,000.
192,000 listens on your podcast and over 3,000 subscribers on your YouTube. You are living up to the go big or go home kind of mantra for the wargaming hobby, which is a fairly niche hobby. You know, we're not pushing out Joe Rogan numbers or anything over here, but that's pretty impressive. We look forward to diving deep into the conversation with you today about the journey on making the big game great again. However, before we start, we want our listeners, our viewers in the States and around the world to know a little bit more about you. So as with most interviews on the On Patrol podcast, we kind of imagine that we're behind the front lines, sitting around the campfire. You know, we're taking a break to rest our feet and warm up for the moment before heading back. And so while we're here, let's get to know the man of the white rose, the Yorkshire Gamer himself, Ken Reilly. So I'll kick it over to my co-host here, who is
Wyndehurst Production.
Wyndehurst Production.
We've been off the air for a couple months, so
we've been off the air for a few months. But yeah, we're getting back into the swing of it for the first question, so we can get to kind of know you before we get into the topics.
Yeah, thanks. Sure. Yeah, so Ken, the first we sent you the outline. So first couple questions, kind of get to more know about you, and then you'll kind of get into the Yorkshire Gamer and what that looks like. So the first one we always like to ask our guests is, when did the hobby start for you? When did you get into it, and a little bit how you got into it?
Yeah, a very long time ago now. I'm 57, so the hobby really started for me as sort of pre-teen. I was always, and I don't know why, because although members of my family fought in World War II, they were called up and fought. We were not a military family, so I always bought toy soldiers with my pocket money. We would go along to the local shop and buy a box of Airfix figures or a model of a Sherman tank or whatever. Back in those days, it was marbles or sticks or whatever I could get away with without my mum telling me off. Flamethrowers or a Bunsen burner from my dad's shed once. That got me into trouble. And then I kind of got not bored, but I kind of thought there must be another way of dealing with this, and that isn't quite so destructive to the household. And local libraries in the UK were just amazing things back in the 1970s and early 80s. The place where I grew up, which is in Cheshire, outside Yorkshire, the local library had a huge selection of war games books, and I just picked one up from there and solo war gamed, if you like, for maybe a year or two, up until sort of 11, 12 years old, 13 years old, at which point I was taking another book on Napoleonic wargaming out of the library, and a young chap called Sean Wilcox was behind the counter at the library doing a bit of librarianing prior to him going to university, and he kind of said, "Oh, you're into wargaming," and he had a group, and I kind of joined that. So I've never looked back. I've never stopped, even when I've had kids or when I've been really busy at work or stuff. It's kind of, the hobby has always been a sanctuary for me to get away from day-to-day life. So yeah, that's how I got started.
That's excellent. That's similar. I think a lot of us, and I think a lot of people that were born in the 70s or 80s have the same story, because Airfix, was such a, that's a buzzword for hobbyists, whether it be Modeler, Tamaya, or whatever else it is. That's how they get in there. one of these questions you had mentioned Sean already, and so going through our questions to kind of let the listener viewer know you, there was at least you'd wanted to put rules to it, and Sean kind of helped you. So ergo, like Sean was probably one of the most influential to your early hobby days. What does that look like? Like, what games are you playing that like are first kind of getting you into the hobby, and then out of the top three, I know you've had a lot, and just listening to your podcasts, you've had these people that have had. Everybody's going to mention Featherstone or Grant or anybody else like that, but who are the people that are the unsung heroes? Maybe like if Sean is one that are helping you, like, hey, here's the rule book, here's my copy, borrow it. Hey, come over to the house or the garage or whatever. What does that look like for you, and kind of what rules are you playing those early days?
Yeah, that early group back in Cheshire, with Sean and Steve Barker and Carl, Pete Clayton, and Sean Eaton, Simon Weinberger, Conrad Harrison, Dave Bowden. That was kind of my formative group, if you like, and we started with, which probably they will blow everyone's mind now, they're so complicated, but Bruce Quarry's Napoleonic rules, which were part of an Airfix magazine book on Napoleonic wargaming. That was where I started, and a lot of the stuff that I did early on was Napoleonic. That was kind of my first love and the first thing that we did. So those guys were my hobby heroes in the fact that they got me into the hobby. And although I'm only really in contact with Steve Barker now, who's been a guest on my show, he's a historian and he's written a
Great
couple of
episode.
books. Yeah, he's a lovely guy, and that's where I started with those really quite difficult rules. So everything's got easier from there for me.
What is the kind of a follow-up just to that? Like the age discrepancy. Are you all you and your mates same age? They're a few years older, and they're kind of like letting this young, let's imagine, audience listeners, a very young Ken Reilly.
Very
if
young.
you can, right? Yeah, use your powers of imagination. But imagine a young Ken Reilly, or is it like you guys same age? Like, how does that happen?
Yeah, there was kind of two groups within that group. One of which was the same age as me, and then the other one was Steve Barker and Sean, who were a couple of school years older. So when they finished their A levels and went to university, that's kind of when that group broke up. But I stayed with the guys who I was the same age as until we went to university. So there wasn't a lot of difference. And then we had a club in Northwich that we set up between us, and a couple of older people came in and joined that. The Goodlad brothers, and Mad Angus, who I've spoken about on the show before, Mad Killer McAngus, who would just destroy it. Table you, I think they call it these days. But yeah, we all moved on when we went to university, but it was a fairly close knit in terms of location and age group at the time.
That's good.
No, that's excellent. I'll kick it back to Wyndehurst for the next question.
Yeah. So clearly you've been gaming for like, even when I'm your age, I won't have as many years gaming as you have had, just because I compared to Kentuckian, I got into it a bit later. I was like 13 when I was first found out what wargaming was. So in all that time, do you have a favorite rule set, or maybe top three? Like, can I also say it's like hard to pick your favorite child, but if you had to pick a favorite rule set in all that time?
Yeah, I think I would struggle with one. I'm still very fond of the Bruce Quarry rules that we just talked about, and they were kind of famous for having national characteristics. So all different units would have what would be known today as a stat line. But back then it was kind of a little bit different, and we still use elements of that within the rules that we play, which is General de Brigade. I am a massive fan of Furioso, which is my Italian Wars set, that are a relatively new set. and then also Forlorn Hope, which is an English Civil War set of rules, which is again a fairly old. We've updated them a little bit, but they had some really interesting mechanisms in them when they came out, which is probably in the 90s, I would think, where when you played English Civil War, if your listeners are familiar with the tactics, you would have like a central block of pike and 2 sleeves of shot. Before you would calculate, each one would more or less be a separate unit that supported each other, whereas Forlorn Hope had a pike and shot ratio that you could change depending on historically how much shot to pike there was, and we all found that so much easier to work with and also quite innovative at the time. And what we tend to do, because we've got the guys that I play with now, because we've got so many figures and so many periods, that we don't go hunting for new rule sets, because we don't have time to learn new rule sets. We might play English Civil War once every 3 years or 4 years, so we haven't got time to mess about learning new rules. We just use the ones that we know. So with the stuff that I do, I'm never ever going to be that podcast that brings you breaking news. I've done stuff on manufacturers that started in the 80s and stuff. It's not that's not what I do. But yeah, so we tend to stick with the older sets of rules.
Yeah, that was something when the first club I joined in the UK when I was over in East Anglia. Half of club members were like, "Yeah, we don't have the brain capacity for new rules. So here's the list of rules we play if you want to join in our game."
Yeah, which ones do you know?
I didn't know any of them at the time. But I was always down to roll dice for whatever. But there's a couple of guys who are like, "Hey, I'm always down to learn something new. If there's something I wanted, like something like there was Force on Force for Modern. Saga came out about that time. And I was like, "Oh, I really want to try Saga." Yeah. And a couple of them were like, "Yeah, man, we've got models for it. You just bring the rules and we'll play a game with you." And it was nice having that mix in the group because the guys who were well established, I could join their game and it was super easy for them to bring me in because, you've got a list of rules, like you said, that you only know these rules and you play them. So you're probably, relatively speaking, really good at those. So I think that was a really nice experience being able to play with
I think rules fatigue is a real thing. Yeah. And the bad part about it is you'll play, especially if you play several sets or systems, you're like, "Oh man, I love this thing that this rules brings," or "I love that." I know a lot of people, and especially old groups that I've gamed with that have just been around for decades, that have people that are like, "Hey, we played it this way." Some of the things they'll house rule either in that another set has, and they'll be like, "Hey, this is how we're going to play it, but we'll add this phase or something." But I agree with you. And then, you can't be that dog chasing every moving car because you'll never. And the bad thing is, both me and Wyndehurst play a decent amount, I would say, of rule sets. And geez, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to the book, especially World War II, where each of us have played a dozen set of rules. And Ken, I'm sure you've even played more than that in World War II. And it's like, so what is that? Do I do this here? And it's like, oh, you're thinking of 3 rule sets ago. So you're thinking of, whatever it is. So I definitely, rules fatigue is a thing. It makes sense to me. I normally just try to be open, at least, especially if I'm rolling dice with somebody, to be like, "Hey, if you'll help teach me, I'll give it a go." The next kind of follow up to that with, especially talking about your rule sets. I think I know the answer to this question. What's your favorite period? So I know Italian Wars is probably if I look at the Vegas stat line, it's got a 90% chance of beating that. But, I would throw, I think there's a few percentage for World War II naval and maybe some other things in there that you could have.
How about your favorite and your second? So at least we can get something other than Italian Wars on the
list. Yeah, what's give us some top 3 favorite periods you like gaming,
Yeah, it's no surprise. I absolutely love the Italian Wars, and the look of it is just is unbeatable. And all my social media stuff is just absolutely covered with it. And my problem is that do you have Pringles in the US?
Yeah.
Yeah, once you pop, you can't stop.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of my history with the Italian wars, in that I just can't stop, and you know, I'm always on a. I have like a rota of units that I paint to get things built, armies built, and there's always Italian wars in there, even if it's like every fifth or sixth unit, I'll do another one. So without doubt, that is the favourite, and I'm just falling in love, or back in love again, with Napoleonics at the moment. It's something that I've
I saw
always
you painted.
played.
You painted some French here recently. You were posting them on your page, I think, right? Yeah.
Yeah. One of my upcoming projects is Plantsoir in 28 mil, and it's kind of. I used to be a commissioner painter a long time ago, and I worked a lot for the Wargames Holiday Centre here in the UK, and they used Elite miniatures virtually exclusively at the time, and it got to a point where I never wanted to see another one again because I'd painted that many, especially French. It's like no, and now 30 years on, I'm falling in love with them again, and they're crude is the wrong word, but they're a lot more characterful, and than modern the sculpts, but they really come together as a unit. And they just look amazing. So I'm kind of reliving my youth with those at the moment.
What do you think? To kind of, we knew the answer to it, right? Everybody, no listener or viewer is
Everyone does.
surprised if they know Ken. But what do you think? It's funny, you know, in the States, you will have people that are involved in ancients or everything, but they're like Italian wars, Spanish succession, 30 Years War, like aren't those all the same thing? Like history is longer than 200 years ago, this country, you know, in America. And but like, what do you think drove you in, right? There's always, we did an episode on, like, you know, how media can affect you, somebody else, a documentary, a book, or something like this. Like, what is, you know, if I was going to talk about ancients or the Carthage versus Rome, like that's just two very different powers. It's very interesting. They seem at parity, so it'll give you a good game. Like there's a bunch of great history about it and these individual leaders. With Garibaldi or whatever else you think, like what is the big, was there a book, was there a movie, was there some type of media, like what was the thing that like once it got you, you feel like, hey, this is, if you have one, or maybe it was a not love at first sight, but what do you think helped bring you in?
Yeah, the original go in the Italian Wars was one of the first things that I ever did. That group that we were talking about earlier on, they were big into Napoleonics, but they also did Italian Wars in 15mm back then, and I know where they got it from because I did engineering and maths and science and all that sort of stuff, but these guys did history and and all that kind of literature and all that kind of thing. And one of the topics in that level of education for that particular year was the Italian Wars. So the guys who were a couple of years older than me were all massively into the Italian Wars because they're studying it for their A levels. And the first ever display game I did in 1984 at Leisure Centre in Crewe, of all places, which is it's like a railway hub. I don't know if it's the same in America, but the towns that are railway hubs are usually pretty grotty and usually have the worst sports teams in all the leagues. Tends to be what it's like over here. Around that time, the first War Games magazines with colour pictures came out in the mid-80s, and there were some pictures in there of Peter Gilder's Italian Wars collection, which was one of the ones that he had at the War Games Holiday Centre. And I was just this is my problem. I'm always just blown away by really big units that are colourful, that are on great sculpted tables, and a lot of people talk about being put off by that, but that didn't happen with me. It inspired me. Don't talk about big games because people will get put off and it's too much work and they might get. But I never had that. I was like, wow, I want to do that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's going to take me ages to do it, and there's a lot of work involved, and that's kind of where I got the love for back then. And then I kind of had a break for it for a while, and then about 10 years ago, I just picked it up again. And I can't really remember the trigger for that, but it's been with me forever since then.
So
you got bitten.
I'd like to
I
follow
did,
on.
big time.
So is there a book or a source of media or something you'd recommend for people who aren't familiar with the Italian Wars? Like, hey, if you've heard about it, you've heard about Ken talking about it a lot, you've heard it here now. I know almost nothing about the Italian Wars. So like, if you were to recommend something for me, like, here, go read this or watch this movie, and it'll kind of give you a good snapshot. Do you have anything you'd recommend for people?
It's a really difficult one to get into. It's one of those periods that up until very, very recently has been very difficult to find information on. The Napoleonics, it's probably harder. You've probably got too much stuff. And the Italian Wars has never really made it that well onto the big screen, probably because of the numbers involved. If you're putting on lunch for your extras and you need 12,000 men just for one pipe block, then it's a big budget film. So there's a really old film called The Agony and the Ecstasy with Charlton Heston and Rex Harrison, who people might remember from Dr. Dolittle. And Rex Harrison plays Julius II, the warrior pope, and Charlton Heston plays Michelangelo. And there's bits of Italian Wars in that. And there's also a film about Giovanni de' Medici, the famous great devil of the mercenary bands, but that's in Italian and quite difficult to get into. So that side of things, there's not a lot really. Books now, there are a couple of books that have come out recently, one from Hellion and one from Warlord, that are guides to the Italian Wars. So that's kind of where people would start. Or the Hellion have got a 5 or 6 book series on the Italian Wars, going on to different parts of it, and they're all great books as well. So that's kind of where I would go to start.
Cool.
And I thought you were going to offer him, like, when you started talking about Giovanni, the Wargames Illustrated, with the flag in the background, that'd be a great resource and place to start. I mean, historically accurate. You got set up. That was a softball. You could have knocked that out of the park. Argonne,
yeah,
upper 90, whatever you want to call it over there. Okay. No, that's great.
I try and keep out of those arguments now. I know I'm right because I'm from Yorkshire. Because everyone in Yorkshire is right about everything.
Yeah. Amen. But I'll kick it back to Wyndehurst for the next question, which I look forward to. I look forward to your answer. This will be a good one.
Yeah. So this one, it's like your favorite unit or model, and it doesn't necessarily have to be Italian Wars. It's just like in your collection, if you have the chance to get this unit or this model out on the table, it's your go-to, or it could also be the one that you're just the most proud of. Like you just nailed the painting on it, and you just are so satisfied and proud of this unit or this model.
That's a really, really tough one, to be honest. A really, really tough one. And I've got to say that it is one of the most recent units that I've done at the moment. I don't know whether that's like, how rock bands always say our last album was our best. I kind of sometimes feel that way. But I did a pipe block as a little bit of a joke, mostly to wind some people up. But I did it in the my football team, who are absolutely dreadful, Bradford City, got promoted last year for the first time in like 20 odd years. So I did an Italian Wars pipe block, but I painted each of the individual men within the pipe block in a kit or a uniform of Bradford City over the last 112 years that they've been in existence, and I just thought it was so much fun doing it, and it does actually look like a really nice Italian Wars unit. And then people will be looking at it and they're going, "Is that a Bradford City kit?" Are those Bradford City flags? So, because all the flags are flags that are kind of flown in the terraces just as the team walks on the pitch. So it's completely non-historical, but it's my favourite unit at the moment, and I'm hoping to have it out on the table at a war game show in the UK very soon. But there's so many. There's the Papal's Waves from the Garibaldi project, my Knights of Saint Lazarus, my Crusades, the Young Guard that I'm doing at the moment for the Napoleonics. There's so many units that I'm really happy. I love getting playing with them as well. So yeah.
I would think a commission painter, as many units that you did for the War Games Holiday Center, you'd probably be like, I lost the minis. You did one up really great, and you were like, oh, I don't know where they went. I'll pay you for them. It's like it's giving away a kid to adoption. I assume you have probably some of those that you're like, oh man, I really did this general too well. I'm gonna have to.
Yeah. I mean that's a long time ago now, so probably I would think that they would be better now if I did them again. But it was at the time it was paying the gas bill, so it was needed.
It worked out. The next question we have about is, wargaming is obviously like a social hobby. It is, even if it's niche. And so we love this question because we get to challenge ourselves and think about it and kind of what is the best war game you've ever played. And so it's not the rule set, it's not the actual game, the players or the table, the time. That's kind of what we're wanting to get into. An example like playing the Battle of Rourke's Drift at Salute in the early 2000s, or something about it was just you had the right amount of Cheeto dust on your fingers for the dice were hot. You have like I've had people go. Playing with my best friend or something like that really meant a lot to me, and I remember this game, or they'd passed on, or playing this campaign, or that it was a lovely time, or this unit that is supposed to be trash levies just kept rolling sixes, and I remember that game because the event was just so. If you had to nail it down, and I know you're a man that has played a lot of war games in your lifetime, you can do some honorable mentions, but what would have to be one of the best, kind of war games you've ever played?
I would have to go back to a refight that we did of Waterloo when I was a teenager. My friend Sean, his father was used to make commercial films for ICI and big companies like that, and he had his own cinema in the garden. Would you believe that we would take the seats out and do huge games in there? And we played Waterloo one time. Well, two or three times probably, and I'll always remember this one because me and Sean had Sean was quite an arty type and quite I can imagine he would have been a brilliant actor, but he kind of said, let's stop this senseless killing and fight to the death, and we had a tape measure duel, which made it always makes me laugh. That does. And then towards the end of the battle, it wasn't going very well for the French, so they kind of did an all or nothing charge with a load of they got the guard lancers and the line lancers together in one big chunk, stuck Napoleon at the front of it, and charged the British line. And lo and behold, Napoleon got killed. Which led to the complete and entire collapse of the French line, and that's kind of one of those things that you can never forget because it was just absolute do or die. This is it, lads. One final push, and it just went horribly wrong.
I wonder. I guess that's where Oliver Stone got the idea from, right? With the final, with the Napoleon charge, you guys are owed some royalties. You played it on the tabletop decades before.
I'm waiting for my check.
No, that's awesome. I'll kick it back to Wyndehurst for the next one.
Yeah, so this one you've kind of already answered. Usually we're asking people about how they transition into lobby. So you told us already that like a lot of our guests actually are this way. They started with Airfix models, especially our guests from the UK, where I feel like a lot of the newer generation, it's a lot of people coming over from Warhammer 40K and stuff into historicals, which is kind of how my transition went. So since you've kind of already told us about that, but you've been involved in the hobby so long, how do you feel like the main transition is? Are we still getting people from the model building world into wargaming, or are they mostly coming from those high budget fantasy sci-fi games into historicals?
Mm. It does seem to be now the vast majority are coming from the fantasy side, the 40k, etc. Games Workshop are so good at bringing new people in, and all good to them for that. And then people will graduate towards. I'm
That's a
trying
very
not to be
diplomatic way
negative.
to say it. That's a very diplomatic way to say it.
Why don't you go back to that? Yeah, it's a question you ask every viewer or
It
listener.
is.
Like, is Games Workshop the devil?
Yes, as I say, there's no bias in that question whatsoever. But so yeah, we get that's kind of most where people come from these days. However, I have noticed recently that there is with the boom, and I mean big boom in board games. Um, in the pandemic, that we're now starting to see. I've got two or three friends who were, big into board games and would maybe meet up two or three friends in a house on a Thursday evening or whatever. We're starting to see a trickle through from there, but there isn't that. And the world is a very different place from when I grew up. There isn't that playing with toy soldiers as a child thing that we had. We would we looking back now, it's a wonder I'm here, but we would run around the houses and the fields near where I lived with plastic machine guns and pretend to play war and stuff like that, and back then that was just normal, whereas now it would draw 10 or 20 armed police as a response, and you would be lying with your back with a heckler and cock in your face. But it's a different world. So I don't think we get that many people now who are so obsessed or interested in war and soldiers and weaponry as a younger person. That just doesn't seem to be there anymore.
Yeah, I feel like I have seen, like you mentioned, it feels like D&D has started to make a bit of a comeback.
Yes,
It's been more socially
yeah.
acceptable, and I've run into people who are like, "Yeah, I play D&D," and then telling them about wargaming. It's like, "Oh yeah, this is like that, just better," and kind of pull them in. And I've also tried
It's
to get a lot of people from the video game side. So there's like some World of Tanks. It's a very popular like tank video game. They went ahead and made a tabletop game, and I was like, all right, it's not the best World War II armor combat game, but if it's something to help draw people in, so trying to capitalize on people who play video games and get them into this side of the hobby, seems to be another avenue with this generation.
It is.
Yeah,
it is difficult. I think.
Yeah,
It has its challenges. I'll say.
yeah. I think that the overall public perception of the hobby has changed dramatically in recent years, and it's a lot more, as you said, socially acceptable these days. And you're not, I didn't really tell anyone when I was younger. I kind of had like two separate lives, and the joke with wargamers over here in the UK was that the only time that wargaming was on the television was when the person who was wargaming was the perpetrator of some horrific murder on a TV show. And they'd clip to the scene where the police are raiding his house, and they'd go into his bedroom, and there'd be loads of toy soldiers. But with those toy soldiers would be a load of Nazi regalia and loads of books about Hitler and stuff. So it's not there anymore. It's a lot more accepted.
that's good.
There's still like reverberations about it, but being young and being a platoon leader in the military, it was one of the reasons I developed Fightin Kentuckian, is I could just kind of like, hey, this is my outlet for that. I remember, Wyndehurst developed a system that the Air Force uses, a war game for
Yeah,
security
brilliant.
basis. And so, it's got its outlet. And I remember like there were some times where I would talk to soldiers about it or like try to show like, hey, here's a squad level game that you can you feel like you're playing a game, but you're actually learning good principles of combat as well. And then I do remember, like another soldier, I'll say, coming up to me and be like, well, do you think people are miniatures? Like, what, is this a game? What's going on? And it leads to some conversations where like, hey, this is taken out of context, or you feel like you have to bear that cross and kind of explain yourself like, hey, here's why I'm doing it. Oh, you watch Netflix movies that are unrealistic and everything. I'm learning about people that really fought and died, and like, hey, the
Mm.
Italian wars. Now I'm more squared up on this history. So it's an interesting kind of concept. We're going to dive more into kind of where the hobby's going in the future later on. I know it's one of the points that we talked into. But what I want to go back to is I remember from your earlier episodes when you first started, and I know it's the pandemic's going to be a lot of your origin story. You're the Joker and the Batman or something like that. How did Yorkshire Gamer get released upon the world to spread the
Yeah,
big game? And
yeah.
tell us a little bit more about that. I've heard the 30-second elevator pitch about it, with your
Mm,
earlier episodes. I think you talk about it like, hey, nobody was doing this. I
mm.
wanted to do it. I wanted to be a voice to the big game. Everybody's going, you still have it up on your website. Like, hey, I'm tired of 10 miniatures aside and 3 tables. Like, so what helped add to that and to getting you, being a content creator in the hobby? Like, talk to us a little bit about that decision and a little bit more, tease that out for us.
Yeah, sure, no problems. I'd been doing a blog for about 10 years, and Yorkshire Gamer tends to be about 5 years behind everyone in everything else that I do. So I'll see wargaming blogs, for example, and I kind of went, "Cool, who wants to read about toy soldiers on the internet? That's rubbish, that is." And then 5 years later, I start my own blog. And then YouTube came out, and I kind of went, "Who wants to watch toy soldiers on the internet? It's rubbish." 5 years later, I started my own YouTube channel. So there's a lot of negative reaction to start with, and then I always go, "Actually, it's a really good idea." So the podcast, although it started in the pandemic, was very, very little to do with the pandemic, because my job, the pandemic, it didn't matter that there was a pandemic on, and there are lots of people out there, in yourselves, soldiers, medics, firemen, police officers, lots of areas, delivering fuel to petrol stations, stuff like that. My life didn't change at all, really, apart from it was quicker to get to work because there was nobody on the road, and we had to sit apart at the office, and it was all very, very weird. But the pandemic didn't really change my life that much. But how it started for me was, I've got about an hour and 15-minute commute to work, and I'm big into my music, but I kind of like, I've heard that 1,000 times, and what else can I listen to? So I listen to talk radio, which I don't know in the States whether it's similar to the UK, but it's just full of nutters who come on and scream either wide left or wide right. It doesn't really matter, but none of them seem to be very sensible or level-headed at the same time. So that didn't last very long, because the whole idea of the commute is the de-stress, or building yourself up to going to work, and that was just making me a lot worse. So I started listening to podcasts, and I found Jay Arnold, veteran wargamer.
Veteran wargamer in the Midwest. Yeah, in the Midwest here.
Yeah, from the States, and my good friend Sean Clark and God's Own Scale were the two that I started to get into, and I really enjoyed it. But the thing that I found was that there were a lot of like not snide comments, but there were a lot of comments during those and other ones that I've forgotten the names of now. But it was like, oh, you can't do that in 28mm, and oh, we haven't got time to do this, and oh, nobody's got that much space to put a 20-foot table on, and nobody's got 20,000 figures, and I kind of think I have. And then it kind of just niggled away at me. And it got to the point, and I think the pandemic did have something to do with this because I wasn't regularly meeting up with people again. But I kind of thought, am I the last one left? Am I, I don't know if you've seen that film, I Am Legend, Will Smith and the dog. And it's like, am I the last one? Is it just me and the dog? I've got a big gaming room upstairs that I don't know if you guys are the same, but I can spend hours in there. I'm doing something, but it's hard to put down what I'm actually doing. I'm reorganizing a tray, or I'm putting figures somewhere. You know what it's like, guys. So I'd had a few. I tend to take some whiskey up there with me and just keep myself going. And I kind of went, right, I'm going to do a podcast, you buggers, and put a post on. I can't remember whether it was Twitter and Facebook or Facebook on its own. Right, guys, I've had enough. There's no big games on podcasts. I'm going to do a big game podcast. What do you think? And I went to sleep, woke up in the morning, completely forgot about it. And opened up my social media, and it was like, I think it was 126 comments. Oh, Ken, that'd be a brilliant idea. Oh shit! Oh, sorry, I've sworn. But I'm gonna, have to do it now. Which kind of spurred me into it, and I'm glad it did. To be fair, because I've really, really enjoyed it. And I decided to do 5 episodes with 5 people that I knew, all of which had some element of big gaming involved. There was a couple of guys who were putting on a huge worldwide Wars of the Roses event. Then there was a guy who got a War Games holiday centre just down the road from me. Another guy, big Scottish medieval historian, who I didn't quite realise how famous he was until I actually looked him up after he'd been on. And I went, oh, bloody hell. But he said yes. And then a lad, Colin Ashton, who lives up in the northeast, who was doing big online games with cameras and stuff. And then Mark Freeth from the Holiday Centre. And I thought, well, I'll see how it goes. And I thought, if I get a couple of 100 people listen, I'll be happy. And it was 4 or 5 times that. And I just carried on going, and I've never I got not close to stopping, but I got a bit fed up with it at one point because it was just taking up too much of my time. But from then, I've just carried on, and I honestly can't see an end to it.
You do a lot of content with like the posting pictures on that stuff. You get your audience involved a lot. You do the the World Cups are the things you do. But one of the things I remember, like that how like somebody in North Carolina, a paratrooper at the time, like, how do I find out about this man yelling at clouds, right, in Yorkshire, like this old angry man? I'm kidding. But how do I find about you? And I think I was like researching something. I was like, I was at the time painting my Carthaginians, and you had posted like a videos of some of your Punic War armies, and I was like, oh man, you had painted armies really quick. I'd heard the big game. I remembered my time in it, and I was just hooked. Once I'd heard, I think I listened to a bunch of the first few episodes. Mark Freeth, I remember. John Lander, I remember, because I'd gamed with him when he was here in the States, and I was like just kind of hooked. And then you're definitely a different take. Not a hot take. I didn't say hot take. Like controversial take. But you're definitely a different take, because I agree with you. Like, most of the content that was coming out was either it's focused on a skirmish game, it's focused on some niche kind of things, and for those that have never graced a convention, or seen the big games or played at the Holiday Center and those things, it was definitely like it seemed that there was an audience that needed it. And I remember my times at the con. That's why when you were talking about the big game, I was just like, yeah, this is awesome. And I think you're hilarious. So you definitely have some good sound bites and funniness in there. No, that's interesting that's kind of it wasn't as much the pandemic as it was kind
Mm,
of the drive. You know, hey, I've got to have something to do, and then when you're digesting all these content creators out there, you're like, hey, there's not this, or maybe not even this hole that's being filled, or kind of a challenge, like nobody's doing this, or I'm going to do it, whatever. I'm going to lace up my boots
mm.
and try this on. That's awesome. I had thought it would have been more of the pandemic, and I know you talked about it in your early episodes, like, hey, this is, but that's interesting. I like that. That's an awesome kind of origin story of
If I
the
had to
Yorkshire
blame it on
Gamer.
if I had to blame it on anything, I would blame it on single malt whiskey, and that's with an E or without an E. I drink Irish and Scottish, it's something that always gets me into trouble because it just loosens the brain just that little bit, and you come up with
The
like
inhibitions, yeah.
it's like I'd been interviewed on a show. It might have even been before I started the podcast, where a guy had asked me how many figures have you got. And I just went, I've got absolutely no idea. And it kind of just twirled around in the back of my brain for a couple of weeks. And I'm upstairs pottering around doing whatever I'm doing, lining hedges up or whatever, wasting my life away with 15 mil, 28 mil terrain or whatever. And I had after whiskey 3 or 4, I kind of went, I wonder how many figures I have got. 1, 2, 3. So
Oh
that took me like another 2 weeks of counting. So, but just going back to that grumpy old man thing, and it's something that some people just don't get.
it's a
Um,
carrot. It's
uh,
I'll defend you, Ken, on this. I think if you listen to any of Ken's episodes, you understand that he's the episode you did with Ken Hamming, the tributes
yeah,
you've done. Like, this
yeah,
guy's a genuine guy.
yeah.
When we're with our mates, as you say, or with our friends or everything, social aspect, like we razz each other, we do all those things, and like it's obvious that you're doing that. I love the hyperbole and stuff that you do. It
Mm,
makes stuff a joke. It makes it kind of
mm.
lighthearted, and I can already tell. Obviously there's people that take it seriously, and
Way
they
too
just need to move
seriously.
on. They need to move on. I think the interviews that you've done and the genuine nature that you talk about things, like anybody who thinks that this person is just antagonistic or something like
Mm,
that is they're a nutter, as the
yeah.
English phrase.
Yeah, there's very much a bit of a character in it, in
Yeah,
some of it, when I look back at all the comedians that I absolutely love, they have like a catchphrase or something that they do, and because you do it repeated, it just gets more and more funny.
yeah,
So but
yeah.
with anything that you do, if you try and inject humor in it, somebody's going to get upset.
Oh, for
And
sure, for
people,
sure.
yeah, people when they come across, certainly the Brews in the Bin Yard episodes, oh, you're gatekeeping and you're doing all this sort of stuff, and it's just absolutely, absolutely rubbish. I couldn't be more welcoming to people in the hobby and bring people in from anywhere that they want. But let's face it, guys, if you're doing a game where you've got something sat on the back of a chicken and you're jousting with it, then you should expect a level of laughter. And that's fine. If people see my Bradford City pipe block and start laughing, that's a job done for me. So I don't find laughter and humour and Mickey taking about any particular type of game offensive.
Yeah,
I find it really. If somebody takes the Mickey out of my stuff, I find it really funny because I've made them happy.
yeah,
And that's the same with this chicken jousting. That's the current butter and trench crusade. They're the two butts of jokes
yeah,
on our
yeah.
on,
I,
on
I
our show
was
at the moment.
yeah, I was getting ready to talk Church Crusade. A lot of this, these first few questions, we were supposed to talk a lot about you, but you're so intertwined in the podcast that we're getting
Yeah,
a little bit ahead of ourselves. I'll kick it back over to Wyndehurst for the
yeah,
next
sure.
question.
Yeah. Well, I kind of also want to follow on question first about how you got into the podcast, because obviously we're fairly new on the
Mm,
podcasting scene, And as you know, for people who've never tried this, like you were at one point and we're in that learning, you're trying to figure out how you want your podcast to be, your content to be.
Yeah.
What's the rhythm and the format? And for all the episodes I've listened to is yours, it's always you and a guest.
Yeah.
And was that a conscious decision? Like, did you decide, I always wanted to have someone here to talk to and go over things. Like, how'd you come about that format? Was that just what you liked? Do you prefer listening to stuff like that, or it just felt like a good recipe?
It was a conscious choice, a conscious decision, because I didn't want it just to be about me. At the time, I had a relatively successful blog, and maybe 1,000 followers on YouTube. It's not a big group of people. So, was there going to ever be any interest at that moment in time with me wittering on myself? And maybe there would have been, but I chose to highlight the areas of the hobbies that I really wanted to get onto the air, which was the big game, but also the history of the game. A lot of people I have had on are telling stories from the 70s and the 60s, and the tribute that we mentioned earlier on. Nobody else is doing that, and that's really important to me. Without being melancholy for a while, but I have had people die whilst they're waiting to come on the show, and the people who I really wanted to have on the show to get a recording of them so that they're there forever, and we've done tribute shows to Peter Gilder and Charlie Wesencraft, the real heroes of the hobby in the UK. Sorry, I've just kind of drifted off the topic there. I do apologise. Just go again with where I was supposed to be going.
No, I was just curious about that format decision. But you
format.
It was. I'd listened to other podcasts that are maybe a single person or two or three people, and it's great to start with. So I was probably thinking about longevity earlier on without really even thinking about it. Consciously, but I then at episode 25 I was kind of thinking, well, you guys have said all this before, and I know what you're going to say, and I know what you're going to say, whereas if I've got a different guest on, or a guest on that doesn't appear on the show again for 3 or 4 years, then it's new, it's fresh, and it's different every time, and you don't know until you speak to somebody on something like this. You don't really get an idea of the character unless you know them really well. Yep. But when you've spoken to somebody for 3 or 4 hours, like I do, then there's nowhere to hide for people. What you do and believe about the hobby will come out. So that was the main choice, and then as I've gone along with it, I've brought in new formats just to keep it interesting for me.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll kick it over to you, Kentuckian.
One of the kind of follow-up questions, or the next question that we had for this is looking for, because you got into this side and you're no stranger, anybody that creates content is going to get people taking stuff out of context or get hate or get whatever, right? You put yourself out there. Well, your podcast is too short. It's too long. It doesn't do this. Yeah. You're gatekeeping, whatever. I mean, people are going to say whatever they're going to say, right? And they probably had motives to begin with. But what are some things as far as that you saw as like unanticipated lessons learned, like early on from the podcast? I see you like kind of come with this grit of like, I'm going to fill this gap that nobody's doing. I've challenged myself. I put it out to the forums, the social media. Everybody kind of was like on board with it. And so now I'm backed into a corner. I got to commit. I'm going to do it. And then even your early episodes, I just enjoy it. You have these taglines, and I think they're lighthearted and they're good. And if you know Ken or you've listened to his recordings, no weird shit is funny. I love that. I love it. Or quit effing about and paint it. Like I will be at my table some days, and I'll be like, oh man, I don't want to paint this, and I'll be like, in my back, I have Ken Reilly in my head saying, quit effing about and just paint it. And
do you know the origin of that?
no.
Okay, so I get as well as the negativity and the abuse. I do occasionally get some nice things, I got this young lad got in contact with me and said, "Oh, I'm just getting into historical gaming. I'm just starting to paint, and I'm kind of not really getting anywhere. Can you give me some tips and some help?" I said, "Yeah, sure, no problems at all. Just tell me what you're doing now." So he sent me this like huge long paragraph of, well, I'm highlighting in this color, and then I'm adding another highlight. I'm doing this zenith primer, and then I'm doing some washes, and then I'm adding this in, and then I'm putting this medium in with my paint, it just went on forever, and it was like, you've done 25 minutes and you've not even put the brush on the figure yet. So I just literally said, stop effing about and paint it.
I love that.
But then it merged. It went on from there and gained a life of its own. Really, I put a meme out with it on, and other people have used it and stuff. And it's kind of got another meaning now, which is that. I've done it. I'm sure everyone who's listening to this has done it. Where you sit at the paint desk and you do absolutely everything that you possibly can apart from paint. You rearrange your paints in dark to light, and then you rearrange them back into alphabetical order, and then back into color order, and then you sort all your paint brushes out, and it's like you procrastinating it. Just stop effing about and paint it, and it's kind of just taken a life of its own now, which I find is quite amusing.
Oh, that's hilarious. I did not know the origin stories of it, but if you're a hobbyist and you've painted your own minis, or you painted minis in the past, like, you know exactly what Ken's talking about when he says that, like you do. Yeah. In order to not get too ahead, because I really want to talk the big game and like how you see you're being a pioneer when we get into topics. I think it's one of the biggest topics, especially where you seem to be, at least in the minority of podcasts, and we'll talk about the successes of like the big game. Is it, resurgence? But what I want to say is at least one of what's an unanticipated lesson learned from being an early, kind of content creator. Something that you wouldn't have thought about. We know there's going to be like some ne'er-do-wells out there and some people that are going to hang on every word that you have and want to crucify you and stuff. But and to those people, like, I'll say piss off, right? But the idea is like, what's an unanticipated lesson learned of, you having the reach you do, the pull you do, and just trying to break brush and get the big game out there. Something you didn't expect, but you feel like you've learned it.
Yeah, it's quite a difficult one. I think one thing I could say, and I had an example of this yesterday, is that people who I saw as my hobby heroes, growing up and over the years, I would now consider them as friends, with them having been on the show. I'm sure he won't mind me saying, but Henry Hyde, who is a legend over here with his, magazine editor and all sorts of things. But I just rang him up yesterday just to see how he was, and we had a lovely chat for 20 minutes on the phone. So that the big lesson is that, if there is one, is that virtually everyone in this hobby is really approachable, and there are very few who have airs and graces that I want a bowl of M&Ms with all the purple taken out or whatever. There's very, very few people like that, and most people will quite happily spend time with you. And as I say, I've become good friends with a lot of people who I never even thought I would talk to. I mean, I had Nick Jellicoe, the grandson of the Admiral of the British Fleet at Jutland, on the show for 4 hours. How did that happen? Yeah. How did he even answer the email? So yeah, that's kind of a thing. An unexpected consequence for me is the people that I now know and the contacts that I have. And when things come up now, if I want to do one of the shows that are coming up soon is one on the first ever copy or issue of Miniature Wargames, which was April 1983, if I remember correctly. I know who to reach out to. I've got all these friends, and they just go, "Yeah, no problems, Ken. We'll do 20 minutes with you. Crack on."
I love Wyndehurst jumps up and down on this point. I'm going to kick it to him to expound on it, but he is the one that says like it is such a great community. It is when you get into it and you dive into it, and it doesn't seem like it at first. Or maybe just like all social interactions, like people are kind of scared to get out of their comfort zone. Henry Hyde, his campaign book is amazing. Like I would love to talk to Henry Hyde one day, but Wyndehurst, you have said that since you got in, and somebody who got in, I think not at like the infancy or like the normal trajectory, like that's something you've jumped up and down on. And I think that's to Ken's point. These people, nobody is even, we're talking to Yorkshire Gamer who has a huge reach, 200,000 listens, all of this stuff, and you're giving us the time of day. But I will say there are people in the hobby that there is maybe an ivory tower, or there are people, but it's very rare. It's very rare. Like, maybe there's some people that are too big for their britches or something, or they think their game's all that is, and they do that. But I will say it's rare. I've maybe encountered it on one or two occasions in my 37 plus years in the hobby. So like, I would agree with you. And then just the friendly nature of these people willing to just lend down a ladder or a rope for you. Like, and you do it. I've seen you do it on your pages when people are asking about colors or paints, or even if you say, stop effing about, that might be the best advice that kid got. But no, any follow up on that, Wyndehurst, because I do think that's a point you've made on several podcasts.
Yeah. And I like to highlight it in the sense that my wife, who I'm very thankful and blessed, is a huge supporter of my involvement in the hobby, but she'll just straight up, like, she'll be one of the first to tell you it's a great community, because she's come to like my best game, like the question we asked you, was with my club in the UK when I was there the first time, and we did a 4th of July game, and she came out and we grilled and she helped cook food, and she hung out with us and all the other gamers as we did this. And I had a collection stolen when we were in North Carolina, and like I reached out to the community like, hey, keep an eye out for this if it's on the market. And a bunch of people and companies says, hey, I've got extra castings. Can I send you this? Can you pay shipping on it at least? And it's like, she's just like, this community you're part of is like the best community I've ever seen anybody part of, because everyone's so friendly. Everyone looks out for each other, and the number of bad apples to good the ratio is so strong in the good compared to a lot of other communities. So, kind of jumping into one of our next questions.
I would say leave out the alpha part, because he'll probably get into that
which one?
When we talk our topics. Question 11 would be our next.
Yeah. Well, so then the first part of that, issues facing the hobby, especially, you have a unique perspective. I think you ought to, considering you have a different guest on usually, every episode. Sometimes they've been back, so you probably have a really good pulse on the wargaming community from people you've talked to. But do you feel like there's any big issues facing the hobby right now?
Personally, I think I don't know whether it's a big issue or whether it's just going to be a natural progression. But we're obviously seeing now the huge rise of 3D printing and print at home figures and stuff like that, and that must be a danger to the traditional manufacturers. I thinking about the States. You've got GHQ over there who produce absolutely amazingly detailed stuff that has been industry leading for a very, very long time, but they're expensive, and especially in the UK they are really, really expensive. And now people are printing stuff that maybe not be quite as good, but it's getting there. So it's whether traditional manufacturers can continue to produce stuff. Can the likes over here of Elite Miniatures and what have you keep pumping out stuff in lead, in inverted commas? I know it's an amalgam of metals, and stay in business when somebody can literally download a file. And my apologies, I don't really know how it works, but they download a file, they print stuff out, and they get up the next morning and there's 25 28mm figures sat on the build plate on the printer, and it's cost them 3-4 English pounds in resin and electricity and stuff. Whereas, you know, if I bought that from a manufacturer, it would be 50 or 60 pounds in metal. So I don't think it will happen in my lifetime because I'm very old. But it's something that in the future, will all of those traditional manufacturers go? And you know, shows in the UK are very much based around trade. I know it's different in the States, but if those traders aren't there, will the shows survive? Because are people going to go along to see Dave and his big screen with a 3D image spinning round on it? Oh, I'd like to buy some of those, and you give him your money, and he gives you a code to download. Yeah. And you're not walking away with a bag full of soldiers and that great feeling that you have when you get home from a show and you open all your goodies out and oh, look what I bought. Oh, it's fantastic. So that for me is the challenge for the hobby in coming years, is the growth of homegrown stuff. You know, we had people who would do homegrown casting with metal in the past, but they were shocking. But with 3D printing, some of the stuff I've seen has absolutely amazed me.
Minifigs and Old Glory were like a staples of my hobby for decades. And, you know, you can't find minifigs anywhere, you know, on eBay. And Old Glory, because they were true kind of 25mm, now everything's gone to heroic scale and they've kind of still kept casting. I'm sure, you know, they have challenges to some degree. They're, you know, I know Old Glory, they sell in UK, so I'm sure you've seen their sculpts. But that's just a really interesting concept. Piano War Games is one that I know is they do the STLs, they can give it to people, but then they'll also cast metal. I've seen them like run advertisements on that, and it seems like, you know, to your point, like I do think war games companies are going to have to evolve to, you know, combat this threat if they want to still be around. And we do need people, you know, coming out with great sets of rules, good games, you know, stuff like that. And whether it's designing the miniature STL file or whatever, I hope they weather the storm, because I think the mom and pop shops, it's a resource war. And especially with AI, like how is AI going to contribute to this? I'd love to go sit down at an AI right now and just say, write me a great Italian Wars rule set that I can, you know, one page and put it all in there. So I do think it's a challenge. I think you've hit the nail on the head of what that's going to look like in the future. But we wanted to hear your side of it.
Question, though.
Yeah, I think plastic figures has made a big change as well.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm aware of a lot of people out there who, you know, like ask for advice for figures for whatever period, and they don't even realise that there's hundreds of metal ranges out there that fit that. It's like, oh well, I can't find them in plastic, and because of the really, really high costs of development when it comes to plastic, the smaller companies can't do that. You know, one sprue would make them bankrupt. So you know, there's the danger of then compacting the number of companies who produce figures to either big company which does plastics and metal, or little company that does STL, and we would have less of a wide variety of figures and manufacturers to choose from, which I think would be a real shame, because it's always been what we call a cottage industry here in the UK. It's, you know, you say mum and pop, it's the same thing. It's a couple of people or a family working at home or in a very small shop, developing their own stuff outside of a big corporate backer, and I'd hate to see that go.
We had Charlie on here, and the Vox Populi I thought was just so revolutionary for War Games Atlantic and their company to produce. Is they basically, you had to put your money where your mouth is and buy a vote to like, hey, what's the next plastic sprue that's going to be produced? And so I thought that was like, wow, that's, you know, because everybody says I want Papal Zouaves, and only Ken and like several hundred others. Obviously, all of Ken's followers are deadly Italian Wars fanboys. But like the idea is, everybody says that, and then, you know, the company goes up, you know, in smoke because hey, that's not going to sell. But that was a good way to combat it, I think. Hey, we're going to target what the consumer wants, and you can put your money where your mouth is. And I think Wargames Atlantic is definitely, they do the SDL, the digital stuff, as well as the plastic kits, which I highly enjoy. But no, I know you wanted to ask a follow-up, Wyndehurst. I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, so you actually kind of in part answered it, because I was thinking, like, I remember when I came in, the only real plastic options were GW stuff. There wasn't a whole lot for historicals, and what was out there was not great quality. So it never in my beginning, it wasn't much of a competition for your traditional metal miniatures. Obviously, over the last 20 plus years, plastics have become, I would say, equally as available to metal. Like you said, a lot of people don't even realize there's metal ranges. And I actually heard this on a podcast from somebody who predominantly does fantasy and sci-fi, and like they're a big GW supporter. And they had a really good criticism that I think is going to hurt 3D printing as well, in that with a lot of the new plastics and 3D printing, it's all designed in 3D, like on a computer.
Yeah.
And what they were noticing, a changing trend, is they're sculpting these models that can't be painted easily, because what the level of detail you can put into a 3D model is way more than a sculptor can put. And if you can sculpt it, you can paint it. And that was something being lost. And I wonder if that might be something that helps save our metal industry, is that, you've got all these great files. Yes, I could download this army, but it's such a complicated thing to paint unless I'm going to learn how to 3D model and design it myself, which, that's like people casting metal by themselves. It's almost that labor intensive.
I would think that the traditional manufacturers would carry on for a while, because there's still a large proportion of the hobby who are kind of my age, 50s, 60s, who have disposable income. And I could save a fortune getting 3D prints, but I'd rather support Elite Miniatures or whatever and spend that extra bit of money with them. And I've got lots of those figures already, so I'm adding to an existing collection. So I think those guys will be around for a while. In a generation's time, that's when I think the change will come.
Yeah.
Wargames, we had this conversation the other day. Wargames Foundry. The good thing about us being in the military is we move every 2 to 3 yeyears, so we have to look at our collections every 2 to 3 years and be like, oh, there was a bin of all this stuff I bought and I didn't know I had. And Wargames Foundry, absolutely love. I will always love them. I've been in love with them since I was a kid. Great sculpts. I know a bunch of them comes from the Perrys. And when I was looking on the site to help flesh out a few of the units I was going to start painting, based on some of my discoveries during moving, and I was just like, man, 16 pounds for 8 minis, and I'm like, that's 2 pounds a mini. Don't do math in public for us, Ken, that aren't math experts. But the 2 pounds, a mini, and I'm like, wow, that's crazy. But I absolutely love them. I hope that company survives forever. It's such a a guiding light, and I feel this endearment, I'm sure, as you do, and I know Wyndehurst does with some of the companies we've talked about. But I hopefully they evolve to something. I would say that.
Yeah, I would hope so.
I hope they evolve. Any other follow-ups on that before we move on to the topics, Wyndehurst? Any other?
I think anything else we'll cover in these other ones.
So we've got the listener, viewer, and hopefully a bunch of people in the States are now familiar with your Dynamite podcast, that I will say is a juggernaut in the podcast world. And I especially, I give my top votes to anybody who's listening or viewing. Like, you should definitely check Ken out. It is a hoot, as we call it in the Southeast region here. Like, it is a fun time. You will enjoy it. You just ask him to translate some of the English jokes. Do a quick Google search on what posh mushy peas is, and you'll be right up to speed. But the real reason that we talked about this is, I'll say, even from the start, me and Wyndehurst are pro big game. We enjoy the big game, but we want to get into why the big game, and we want to talk out a lot about, give us the details about what makes it superior, and what do you think, if there's any, like, what are some drawbacks to it, if there are any, right? I doubt Yorkshire Gamer is going to say that there are no drawbacks to it.
No drawbacks.
It's awesome in every respect, but I want to really kind of dive into the difference, because to at least set the scene, we know there's been a rise of skirmish gaming. We know that skirmish gaming is a way that the companies use to get people into the hobby. We know that low model count and all of this stuff is an easy, for people that don't like to paint or or whatever, getting into it in. It seems like there's a skirmish game for any period of history, and the made up ones, Trench Crusade and all this other crazy stuff, weird stuff. But it's definitely part of it, and we've even seen it outside of our perspective as being historical wargamers with GW, doing the kill team stuff, or these small model count games, are really good for entry, or at least that's what we're told. But let's talk a little bit about that. Kind of why. Why is the big game? Why do you think it has? Why is it superior to some degree? And then what respects? Let's tease that out as far as give me the reasons for the big game, and let's talk about maybe any weaknesses, and then let's at least discuss, if we can get Ken Reilly to discuss skirmish wargaming at all, that will be a win. But let's talk about where the drawbacks are for that, and if skirmish wargaming has any positive attributes. So I'll kick it back to you, Ken, for why the big game.
It all goes back. I mean, everyone in this hobby is a different personality, and I mentioned it earlier on. Whereas some people will see a difficult job or a difficult challenge or an adversity as something to walk away from, then I think you guys as soldiers will see, maybe from my perspective, that they will see it as a challenge and something that the hard work pays off at the end after you've really given it your all. And that's kind of the big game for me. Is the what's it called? I can't remember. There's a phrase in psychology about how you work really hard and the reward is at the end. It's delayed pleasure or something like that. You work hard to get the pleasure in the end. And I've always been, and I think it's from those original guys. We didn't play skirmish games. We played huge games on 12-foot minimum table, and we'd hire church halls. And rather than say, which annoys the thing that annoys me is people who say I can't do that. And again, you guys as soldiers, you can't have people who say I can't do that. You need to know that your guys are going to do whatever it is. They're going to go left flanking, or they're going to put support fire down for you, or whatever it is. You can't have somebody in your squad or platoon who go, oh, I can't do that. I'm going to go back home. So I think there's a personality side to it. People who enjoy a challenge and a lot of hard work for pleasure at the end of it are more likely to do big games. But I was influenced early on by the friends that I played with, the big games that we played, and then I always remember walking into a show, Mailed Fist it was called, near Manchester, when I was quite young, and I saw this huge table with Napoleonics on by a group called the Sods. I've had a couple of them on the show over the years, and it just blew me away. It was like seeing the best thing I'd ever seen in my life. It was just something about all those huge ranks of toy soldiers in big in big units, in colourful uniforms, and it triggered something in my mind that has never gone away. And I can, I have this thing on my show called the Venn diagram of wargaming, and it's quite a useful tool to see what you will enjoy most in terms of big games and skirmish games, because I can literally go upstairs, bring an army out, line them all up, troops on parade, I call it on the YouTube, and just look at them and go, yes, I did that, and isn't that quite good? So there's very much a visual aspect for me that drives me towards the big game. And
I want to ask you. I want to ask you where you fall. We talk a little bit about. We owe you some quarters because we've asked guests that we've had on here. We don't call it
Mm.
Yorkshire's Venn diagram. I might have to start injecting that. But we ask people, do they love the history? Do they love the gaming, or do they love, kind of the
Mm.
whatever it is, the wargaming, the history, or the kind of modeling aspect of it?
Mm.
And it's a great question. I don't think you've ever answered, and I feel like people maybe go through phases. But
Yeah.
where do you see yourself in that Venn diagram? Where does Ken Reilly fall?
The gaming for me is the smallest part of it because a lot of my work life has been shift based, and a lot of it is call out based. So I don't often, it could be 5 o'clock and the phone could go and I've got to go. There's a famous time when I actually got to the door of Partisan War Game show and the phone went and I had to go back to my car and drive back to work. So it that limits the games that I can play and limits the time I have to play. Hopefully when I retire, that will change. But it's always for me been about the history. I love history and I love learning about history. And when at 57 there isn't a lot of history I haven't learned, so I do try. And with the Garibaldi stuff, for example, I was aware of it but I didn't know a lot about it, and I really enjoyed that deep dive into the history of Garibaldi and learning all about it and then making figures for the game. And then the painting, my mum is an artist, or still is an artist, but doesn't do a lot of it now. So I had that painting gene in me somewhere. And with the type of job that I have, that is quite traumatic at times and can be very difficult, that the fine motor skills and the work that goes into painting and prepping and making units is it's free therapy for me. I could have spent a fortune on having a counsellor, whereas I've spent a fortune on paints and figures at the end of the day. So which one was cheaper? I don't know. So. So yeah, the painting, collecting, and the history are massive for me, with the gaming kind of a little bit of a lesser thing. But the gaming that I do play is very much friendly, banter, friends. I don't like competitive gaming. I don't like sitting across a table from somebody I don't know who's going to just look at rules and glare at me every now and again. I want a chat, I want a laugh, I want a joke.
Yep.
And if you completely wipe out my figures with your guard lancers, I'm just going to laugh about it. I'm not win or lose, I want to enjoy the game. And a lot of the stuff I do is with friends who have been friends for a very long time here in Leeds.
The climb or the journey of the big game is a lot of the fulfillment for like the final
It
thing.
is.
For why you bring the big game. So it doesn't really matter who's Napoleon and who's Ney leading the charge at Waterloo of the big game. To you, it's mainly like it's impressive. The game itself is fun. Like we all conclude that the game is fun, but that a lot of your personal kind of fulfillment and stuff is the climb, the units, the getting this together, getting hundreds, thousands of minis on the table. That's it. I would say I've analogized the big game in my mind to like people who've played D&D or people who've played the D&D analogy might work with it. I really haven't ever played D&D hugely, on a handful of occasions, and it's mainly a friend had to like jerk me through it, lead me through it. But I understand the thing about the D&D that makes it successful when you have a good game of it, or the thing about a big game is I think it is a lot of the people.
Yes.
Some of the best big games that I've played, or where everybody is hands-on in it, and that is so much. In my mind, I do think there is some. You just can't get that in a skirmish level game where it doesn't matter if we put rifles or javelins in the guy's hands. It's like, hey, go get this pig, go get this objective. It doesn't matter.
Yep.
They all kind of come to beat the same conclusion. Where on, if you have a big game and let's say you got this might be a little game or a medium-sized game to you, but 4 players on a side, 4 or 5 players on a side, it's like, okay, you're the wing commander. Like there's a lot depending on you now. This is not a single objective. And yes, you can have a hoot or a laugh about it and stuff, but there is this psychology of the big game that I've seen over the decades. I've witnessed them, I've played in them, that I'm just like, when it's at its zenith and the guy hasn't wandered over to the Starship Fleet game and he's watching it
Yeah.
while you're like, hey, dude, where's our right flank? Where did our right flank go? But everybody's invested in it. You're taking it seriously enough to enjoy the history and let that kind of come out, but not, as you said, so serious where it's like, I have seen this at a big game. An individual had a column on the right flank and they were like, hey, you can't move, you'd be off the table, because if they can't at all at a 45-degree angle, some of the base edge would go off the table. And we're like, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? But I think I will say, that's funny because your enjoyment from the big game and my enjoyment from the big game, although we both agree the big game is amazing as it has its moments, I like the idea of getting the 8 guys there on the same page. I think that would be more of the enjoyment, besides me painting 500 Macedonians and 500 Persians or something. Although I would enjoy that to some degree, and I agree with you on the stress. But I think that's where I would see it just shine. But man, even if you have a great, let's just say mediocre to great set of rules, you got to have, everybody at that table has to have the common goal to be like, we have to have fun.
Yeah.
And we have to take this serious enough. And if it's not there, the big game can be, unfortunately, I've seen some of them be a disaster when people, regardless, either walk away or quit. They leave because of a rough time, and then now you've got one person fielding 2 or 3 commands that is just like, all right, you play John right now. I'm gonna go get a donut. What do you think, Wyndehurst, as far as like the big game? What is the biggest like superior thing after hearing me and Ken's thoughts on it?
Well, a lot of what Ken said actually really resonated with me. My first foray into big game for me was my Hastings armies, so my Anglo-Saxon Norman armies, so that I can put on now like a 6-player Battle of Hastings game. But the same, like with Ken, like I think Salute was my first ever convention, and that was in 2012. So I had already been kind of wargaming a bit, mostly smaller games. So that was my first time seeing proper big games. And same like you can, I just fell in love with it. It was beautiful. And then when I finished, so then I got into Saga, and like it was a skirmish game. But for me, it was always like, well, what factions do I want to pick? Well, I'm in England, and I know a bit about the history between the Anglo-Saxons and the Normans. So it was always kind of like the end goal will always be Hastings. But I had to get there somehow. And so it's like, let me skirmish with what I have. But then I found that, it's like a 6-point game, 6 units. And I was like, well, I've got 8 units worth. Let's try an 8-unit game. Well, how about 10? Because I've got 10 units now. So it's like, let me just get it all on the table. But yeah, when I finished those armies, just having them on the table, like I left them up for like a week, all on review, just so I could admire them. Because the same like you can, like just looking at them. But I really have tried to use skirmish games as a stepping stone. As we'll kind of talk about growing the community, but they're not the end goal, but they are a route to the big game. Because it's like, well, I've got some of it painted, so let's play it now and skirmish. Or in the idea, like, I'm sure a lot of us, it's always, we want to do this grand campaign. And I love the idea of mixing skirmish games and big battle games in a grand campaign. So I don't know what you think. Do you feel like there is a place for skirmish games?
Do you? That's a good point, Wyndehurst, that you said, is like, when you're painting up, whether it be your Italian Wars or whatever, did you have some fights prior to? You have the rules pretty well down. You use the same set of rules, so that wasn't really the enjoyment for you. Did you have any like, hey, the big game that I'm going to post on, I'm going to do a wing of it right here and play it? That's not motivating to you, or it's not really?
No, just going back to a point that you made earlier on about people not enjoying big games, and I do get this, and a number of people have spoken to me about it. And with bigger games, there is a lot of sort of emphasis on the person who organises it to make sure that everyone's involved. My friend Sean Clark tells a story about playing, I think it was Antietam, his first ever big game, and he got the ammunition cart. So literally for a whole weekend, every 15 minutes he'd move his ammunition cart, and then that was it. And it was like, that's horrible. That's absolutely horrible. So when I put games on, I try and get everyone involved, and if somebody is having a bad time or somebody isn't involved in the action, then I'll secretly tweet what's going on to get them involved, and it's having that person with a big game. To do that, and you can have a bad small game, you can have a bad skirmish game if you're playing the wrong person or the wrong set of rules. But I've had fantastic big games with rules that we don't like because we've been taking the mickey out of the rules all the way through the game and just laughing at they were. So yeah, I just wanted to get that in because it is quite important with the people who rule any size of game. But from the skirmish point,
GM makes the game. I totally agree and co-sign that. The GM makes the game.
Yeah, but for me, other than a couple of very specific examples, I generally don't start gaming a period until I've got 500 figures done. That's kind of my baseline, and then we'll go and do 500 figure game and then move on from there.
At one side or both sides? So like 250 a side?
Yeah, about 250 a side. Enough for 7 or 8 units a side, just to kind of get into the rules, and then maybe not choose that set of rules and go for another one. But one thing I do and one thing I've always done is I've never based for a set of rules. I base, I want my unit to look like this. I want my pipe blocks to look like this, and I have an a picture in my mind of what I want it to look like. I do that, and then I change the rules if it needs changing.
That's awesome. Yeah. The one of the things too that we talked about is kind of, we all hit on it, was what we say with going to the big game. We talked about what I've heard as buzzwords, and I know Wyndehurst and yourself is like, it's too grand. It's a bridge too far, and the challenge or the adversity is enough to keep people admiring at it, window shopping, and coming up to your table at Salute or Partisan and saying, oh man, that's a great thing, but I'm never going to venture onto that journey. I would say that's probably one of the biggest holdbacks, like the person's own intestinal fortitude onto joining it.
Yeah.
Again, I think I'm a mediocre painter on my best days, so I do think everybody should do it, and I recommend it. But that one aside, which I think is probably the most obvious one, what other draw? I want to go to the little bit of maybe perceived negatives, if you really think they're negatives, or other negatives of the big game. What would you say, that you'd have observed that either people have told you? Because I know there are no negatives to the big game in Ken Reilly's eyes.
There are not. No, there are not.
But what is another one that you've heard besides the person, not having the gumption to kind of struggle through that adversity? What are other things? Maybe bad GM, bad whatever. I know you guys on a Brews in the Bin Yard, you fired shots at the Americans hosting a big game. Like, didn't know the rules, so like everybody had a bad time. But like, what's some other, you think challenges or maybe knocks that could detract from the big game?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have mentioned, and again, this I can't do it thing, mentality, and space. And yeah, I kind of get that, modern houses are a lot smaller than they used to be, and maybe people don't have the big spaces. But when I was growing up, I had my mum's 6x4 kitchen table, but we all got together and we all put £5 in or whatever it was, and we hired a church hall for the weekend. So I think a lot of people maybe get stuck on the idea that I need to do all this myself, whereas one of the absolute massive joys of a big game is if you can get 5, 6 or even more people all embedded in the same project who go, right, well, I'll paint 5 units and you paint 5 units and Rob, you do 5 units. And then very quickly you are filling a very big table, and you haven't put any more work in than you would do for a 6x4 historical game. So, and people who maybe aren't that good at painting, don't worry about your painting. Just get it on the table and enjoy your gaming, because you might be sat next to a guy like me who really, really enjoys his painting, who maybe isn't into his gaming that much, but you can have an enjoyment from a common end goal for a hobby. So yeah, I'm really, I try to, when people bring up or talk about negatives, I always try and spin them round and go, well, if you did it as a group of mates, would it really be that difficult?
Yeah. The
So
network aspect of a big game and kind of getting buy-in from other people. No, that's awesome.
And
Yeah,
people always,
really,
I always push 28 mil because that's what I love. But there is no reason, and I've always said that my podcast is about big games regardless of scale. So if you've got space at home issues, which is another one, then do it in a smaller scale. Simple as
yeah.
that.
I know on your podcast, like headline or whatever, it was like, and is it any surprise that Warlord released Epic Scale
Yeah.
when I came out with the big game? So especially for us in the States, like if you're thinking about a big game, there's a lot of satisfaction. Besides the adversity or that, and besides the idea, like I agree with the adversity, you kind of like, hey, dig your heels in, use that as a strength, use that as a way to get through it. Both me and Wyndehurst have talked about our time in the service, and I really got back into wargaming after an intense combat deployment, and it helped me kind of, I will say, the therapeutic nature of getting through on the other side of that. But the other, we talked adversity and the challenge of painting that many models, the networking and using a social kind of connectivity to basically like, let's all get the buy-in from this team and let's make this big game a team sport. And I think that's true, and it's asking people to get out there. Wyndehurst, do you think any other kind of negatives, and that you'd love to hear kind of Ken talk about, either from big game or why people would be against it? Is there anything else that you've heard? Those are big ones. I think one that I've always heard has been bad GMs, which I agree with. Like if you go up to a game and you're trying to learn, there was a podcast that did the Millennium Con, and there was people that played a Civil War game, and they just this was years ago. They absolutely hated it. Like the guy didn't know the rules. He wasn't getting people involved. It's like, hey, you are the sentries to your army's camp, so make sure nothing gets back there. Turn 8. Oh, you haven't moved? Well, you're doing a damn good job. No enemies are in the camp. It's like, what? This is not a great game. So involvement, I think that has a lot to do with GM. Is there anything else that's coming to your mind, Wyndehurst, about kind of a nick against the big game?
It might be an issue we face more here in the U.S. than in the UK or Europe. So one problem we face here is density of wargamers. When I got to Gloucestershire for this last assignment, and I was looking for clubs, within an hour in a 360 bubble, I could find 4 or 5 clubs. And so finding a group was a lot easier. It didn't work out as well because for some reason everybody in that side of the UK wants the game during the week, and I'm like, oh, I'm just like you. I work shift work. I can't commit to an afternoon during the week. But in the US, I don't know. In my time, I found a lot more. It's like, well, if I want a big game, I've got to paint both armies, because finding people invested enough to be like, okay, I'm going to paint a division, you paint a division, and we can get, it's been really hard to find. So I don't know what a good workaround is here. Kentucky and I have talked about, tackling big projects and how we each tackle big projects differently, since we've both kind of gone that route of, well, I'm just going to paint both sides. So we paint 2 big armies. Do you have any thought, if you're struggling to find those other players, what's a good workaround to get to the big game?
I don't know what the situation is in the States, but certainly in the UK, we have 3 or 4 war game holiday centres, and Richard Harris, who has the one up near me, Legendary War Game and Games, and Mark Freeth with the War Games Holiday Centre. They're not massively expensive weekends, I don't think, for what you do. But there's another option for somebody if you want. If you kind of think, I'm not really sure about this, I'm playing a lot of skirmish games. Is it worth me putting all that effort in to go big? Then you can spend less than a big box of Games Workshop figures and spend a weekend playing a big game with some of the best figures in the world, with a load of guys and lasses who are going to help you out with the rules and they're really social events. Those are, I've been down and really enjoyed myself, and that's another workaround, I think. I don't know whether you've got any of those types of places in the States.
Nah, we actually kind of talked about this in a previous episode. Yeah.
It's a market that's just not here. I will say around some of the hubs of big cities and in other areas, like I had a decent size war game club in Clarksville there in Tennessee, and there's Nashville, there was a great one. There's North Carolina. Like, it's just the rarity, and as we know with any club or kind of group, it's never been like a business venture. Like, people will come and bring both sides and they'll play like regular hosted games. I think the answer for people in the States who are still, if you're listening to Ken, you're thinking about this big game or it does get you fired up, I definitely think you should. Probably the answer for us here in the States is the cons, is getting to a con as close as you can in your local area. And unlike, what we've talked about in the United Kingdom versus the States, is cons are where a lot of Americans go to play. In UK, they're mainly I think trade shows where you have demo games, participation games. But cons, especially StoreCon, NashCon, some of the bigger ones here, like they're hundreds of tables, or maybe not hundreds, but they're up there. They're double digits. Yeah, 3 or 4 day event where they have every period under the sun being played. Let's just hope the American GM knows the rules and gives you an active unit where you're involved in the game and you can roll up your sleeves. That's probably the answer, but I do agree, Wyndehurst. I've heard that as far as like our geographic location is another thing that I think can be prohibitive for the big game here in the States.
So I had a follow-up question that falls also in what could be considered like a difficulty or challenge with the big game. And that is the biggest games I've been part of. The GM was a separate person, like running the game, but not actively playing in it. But some of the, the smaller big games, let's say 6 to 4 players, everybody's playing, and there's not necessarily a GM. It's more of like the group or the club's putting on the game. For those really big games, it almost feels like, unless everybody just happens to be really familiar with the rules, you need a separate GM. And that could be, for somebody who's like, well, I'd love to do the big games, but I want to play in it. So how do I GM the big game and play in it? What are your thoughts on that, or workarounds in your experience with big games?
It can be difficult, and certainly when I'm putting a display game on at a show, I very rarely play because I'm talking. I kind of do what we call front of house. I'm talking to people who are coming and asking questions about the game, whilst others are playing the game and moving it along. Which I don't mind at the end of the day. I enjoy people. Talking to people who listen to the podcast and what have you, and talking and enthusing people about the big game at shows, but that just means that I don't get to play that much when we're out at Salute or similar. But when you haven't got an element of the public around, then it does help massively if you do have a GM who has organize the scenario, and what I will tend to do is I will tend to play part of the game that maybe there's not going to be any shocks, or there's not going to be any flanking maneuvers or anything like that, because I've worked out the scenario, so I know what's coming. So I might defend a static position or something along those lines. And that's kind of the way to do it. Is you are reliant on this one person to do the GM role, but I've often found in groups, you'll have it in the States, and I've seen it in the States, where you have like a group of guys who meet at somebody's house who's got a big cellar. And you will all, it's usually the guy whose place it is who will be, their kick or their thing is putting the game on for others so that others enjoy it. And a lot of it's luck and, getting in with the right group of people. But once you do, you're mates for life. You really are.
Yep.
That's a good point.
No, I think
do
I
you have any other
totally
thoughts?
agree. The only thing I've seen is the co-op, where I want to say I played in like a Vietnam game or a World War II Japanese game, where the GM was the kind of ambusher or something like that, and the other people were navigating and had to do their objectives. And so
Yeah.
the good thing about it was, to your point, like the GM knowing the scenario was able to be like, hey, this is where I pop up. And I've seen it done horribly and really well, where the different parties were moving at different times, so it allowed the GM to basically like play whack-a-mole and kind of interact with the players that were going. So that way they were learning the rules, and it was like, hey, this turn you're in a firefight, but your right flank platoon is not so much, so they're moving this turn. I'm engaging with you, I'm in contact, so that it allowed it to be the GM, kind of playing multiple people almost. To your point of like, I've seen that outside of static defense with the GM playing has gone well. But there's a lot about the big game where I think, regardless of the journey, if that's the journey to get to that table, and like I think a check mark for Ken Reilly's success is that table look amazing, all those minis painted, by me, and they're there. It's like, it doesn't matter if some dill hole comes up. They're not going to be able to steal that from you, and says something stupid or anything else like that. Like, you've gotten the success. And I know I enjoy the gaming of the big games because it's almost like psychology with like, hey, how do you, like, even from a leadership perspective or, being a good teammate, being a follower, if there's somebody designated as your overall commander on that side, like, are you able to execute? Are you doing well? Like, that's fun in that tension, I think, to degree. But we've said, I do think people are a bedrock, obviously, of this hobby, but people, whether the GM or the gamers themselves, on your side of the table or across, are really going to make that big game. So if there's anybody that's been turned off to a big game or anything else like that, because maybe one of those recipes was, one of those ingredients was undercooked, I ask you to, I'm telling you, there's no zenith like getting, as to Ken's point, thousands of minis on a table with your mates and banter and talking BS to each other. And that's just, it's superior. I don't have any other call. Go ahead, Ken, if you got something.
I think another thing around that as well is that a lot of sets of rules that are based around smaller games spend a lot of time and a lot of energy trying to create friction within the rules, and whereas you guys will know that friction in real life comes from people. So if you've got a basic set of rules that maybe doesn't include a lot of friction, if any, then when you bring 10 or 12 people or 6 people round the table, the friction, and I don't mean that in a fighting way, the friction in not having total control of anything comes from the interaction between the players and the personalities, and he won't mind me saying, but we've got a lad called Ian who is famous for just messing up or doing. He will never do what you want him to do. We had a massive Vietnam. What he does, he always sits up. He always sets his figures up where he sat. So we did a massive Vietnam game, and he sits down next to a clearing. And the VC go, it's Ian. I'm going to set my machine guns and all my men up around this clearing. And where does Ian land his helicopters?
In the clearing, yeah.
So it went from air assault to medevac very, very quickly. And you'll be playing a big game, and you'll have a big scrum down at the start, and you'll usually have a CNC, and they go, right, we're going to do this, and this is our objectives, and then in a big game, you will have that thing that you have in any large project or large group of people doing something. You won't really know what's going on at the other end of the table, and it's only later on that you find out. Jutland is a classic example for this. I've played it many times. Is that you really concentrate on your section of the battle line or the battle cruisers or whatever you're playing, and you ain't got a clue what's going on anywhere else because you're so concentrated on what you're doing, and it's just like a platoon leader on a battlefield won't necessarily know what the next company's doing further down the line until you get that information through your headphones. So that to me is a big part of the big game as well. Is that connection with real friction as opposed to created friction within a rule set.
That's something we didn't jump up and down on, but I do think a lot of people will set themselves up for failure by starting a big game with the most complex rules. Because you said there, the tension, like the two fat lardy system with the command points, bolt action, activation X, whatever you wanted to say, like if you add these CNC things to a big game, I mean, a streamlined one-page sheet of rules can really help a big game flourish rather than just like you said, the tension. Are you going to have an Ian? Are you going to have a Leroy Jenkins that no matter what he does, it's like charge straight forward? This just became the charge of the Light Brigade, and we're supposed to be defending this hill. Why are you moving off the hill? What's going on? But it's a fun. Yeah, I totally concur with that. Wyndehurst, unless you have any points, I'll say we'll move to question 2.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so moving from why the big game, obviously something that Kentucky and I try to do a lot is grow the hobby as much as we can. So is that something you like to focus on? Do you try and grow the big game outside of your podcast and the blog and YouTube? You mentioned that someone reached out to you and you've kind of guided them, but do you guide people along on it? Or what role do you take in that regard?
I suppose I did tell this. I can't remember where I mentioned it, but it was like a little apocryphal tale of the hobby at the moment is a lot of skirmish games in a stadium with big bright lights and rock music and fireworks and people dancing around at halftime and all that sort of thing. And then across from that is a big chasm with a rope bridge, and there's me with a big table and a torch going, look at this. And that's kind of how it felt initially when I started, and not so much now because people are big gaming again, and people are kind of I don't know whether it's got anything to do with me at all, but it does seem to have picked up a little bit. But I'm enthusiastic and enthused about what I do. I go to shows and I put big games on that I try and make as big as I possibly can, and I engage with people whenever I can, the good and the bad. And really, there's not much more I can do with that. I put my content out there. And thankfully, people come and listen to it. And with me doing that, hopefully, I'm persuading people to have a big game or try it. And I did a listener phone-in show not that long ago, and there was a couple of guys on there who had been inspired to do big games, and that was absolutely fantastic to hear. So I promote it, and I hope that people listen and try it. Whether I make a difference, I don't know.
Yeah, so you mentioned, when you started the podcast, it was like, am I the only one? Am I last?
Yeah.
The last of the big gamers. And you feel like it's bigger now. So would you say, from when you started to now, what is your outlook on the big game? Like, is it growing? Is more people receptive to the idea, even if they're not doing it yet? Or is it still just a small niche part of the hobby?
It's certainly a smaller part of the hobby, and I was looking today, just browsing through social media, and there's a new skirmish game for the 100 Years' War, and there was a new skirmish game for something else. So you very rarely see now the bigger game, and maybe we could talk about it later on, but I don't see the economical plan for that for a company, because you get a one hit rather than a one hit and 40 years later you're still buying 28mm Napoleonic. So I kind of don't really get that. But yeah, it's certainly more obvious, but whether that's as a result of people coming out of pandemic, and there was obviously that bit at the end of it where some people were more scared than others than congregating, so it took a little bit while for shows to come back round. But yeah, it's out there, and as long as I'm drinking good old Yorkshire tea, I'll keep pushing it.
I think that's I'm going to go ahead and skip. We kind of were asking you, the next follow-up question would be like, what are the metrics and stuff used? And I think it just shows, your true genuineness on like, this isn't something I'm doing to chase metrics. Like I do this because I enjoy it. This is my passion. This is who I am. I'm Ken Reilly. Like I enjoy the big game. You have already shown people will show up. Like people will listen. People enjoy this. This is a part of the hobby that's not, dead. It's not, to my understanding, not dying. Like it is. Well, there are big games that are coming out. I'm doing that. I just want to pair that against, we've talked a little bit about me and Wyndehurst being transient, moving every 2 or 3 years, and we have this kind of. We started this podcast, it was like we wanted to expand historical wargaming to some degree. I know that no weird stuff, right? Like that's kind of the idea there's too many people out there playing 40K. And one of the things I'd use to kind of, like you said, there's no track like the Airfix to Maya model was when I was growing up, when any of us were growing up anymore. It's those people have played computer games. Maybe they've played like Rome Total War or something that is wet their whistle for history or something like that. But there's no, and again, I think there's crap movies, historical movies being made. Let's talk about Oliver Stone's Napoleon or whatever. But that's probably added to it. Me watching A Bridge Too Far, The Longest Day, and being like, oh, I've got to do this now. So like, how are people getting into it? And I find me and Wyndehurst, like our TTP, our tactic, technique, and procedure we have to create them. And so how do we create them? And one of the best shoehorns I've figured out, I'll say, is like, I want to have opponents wherever I go in the world. And I've been in Japan and created historical gamers and been all over and, all over the States. And one of the kind of ways I do that is colloquially known as 1940K bolt action, right? It's huge. It's popular. There are a lot of problems that are unhistorical, I'll say, about the mechanics of the rule set. And it normally shies away veteran gamers who are like, I want to get the feel of like, why is this MP40 and Thompson the same way? But we will get people who understand maybe a fantasy set of rule set to come over and be like, hey, give this a try. And then, next thing we know, like they've painted up that. Maybe I've shown them an ancient army and then they're into ancients. They've painted up a Celt or a Roman army or whatever the case. And then we're there. I don't like the big game and getting there for me and for the people I've interacted with. A majority of the people, I would say, skirmish gaming is normally like my gateway drug. I'm the guy hiding behind the bleachers going, hey, Jimmy, have you tried this cigarette? It's really cool. And guess what, Jimmy? You only need like $50. You can buy a box and army. And then, your dad served in World War II or your grandfather did. Like, come try this out. And, you can make his unit. And that's normally how I enjoy, don't get me wrong here. This might be blasphemy. I think me and Wyndehurst are on the same page that I can enjoy aspects of skirmish wargaming. I see why veteran wargamers and wargamers such as yourself are like, Matt, you've got a village or a skirmish ancient guy, and you've got a guy in a modern uniform. Like the scenarios are all the same, the things all the same. Like, why don't we just put the soldiers aside, roll 2 dice, and the highest one wins? Like, I do see some aspects of skirmish gaming where people are like, it's not the challenge, it's not the grit, it's not some of the dynamics of the big game out there. But do you see, kind of any benefits in that, I would say, with like skirmish wargaming and getting people? I think that, me personally, I would say that's the new avenue, is me taking people who game Henry Cavill making GW famous and everything else and bringing it to the mainstream. Like, I can't ever get somebody and go, hey, let's talk about the English Civil War, or, Oliver Cromwell or something. It's normally like, hey, you're already doing this. And although you've got Space Marines or whatever the heck your rule set calls for, and those models are super expensive and you have to buy a new codex every few years, there's something that doesn't change. A Sherman tank. It's always been a Sherman tank. And I look at the price on it. You only have to buy once in your whole life. You won't, and I know you won't. You'll buy 50 and a Firefly and all these other things. But I don't tell them that. I tell them, so that's how I feel like skirmish gaming is such a gateway drug for the people that have been out there. And I've seen a lot of war gamers go from skirmish to elevate to like, hey, I'm going to get big game. Is that something maybe you feel you don't have the expertise? Like, hey, Matt, that's not something I've been involved in the decision of that, or what are your thoughts on that?
One thing I do want to say is that when you were talking about that, the guy, here's a cigarette, try this. Straight away, I thought, well, if that's the case, then I'm the old guy sat on the porch of his shed with holes in his shoes and the knees of his jeans, 3 ex-wives going, I bought a cigarette and now all that's left of my figures and my wife's gone and my dog's left me. In fact, I think we could make a good country music song about that. I think that would be. I think that would be a hit.
Wake up with some whiskey. About. But I feel like, because I would say me and Wyndehurst are in this transition period where, I grew up with my father, who is a massive big gamer, right? That's all he does, regardless of how many times he gets it on the table a year. Like, he has the aspirational goals like you do, but I haven't found that that's a way to connect people or get them in, because you only have the elevator pitch at a show, and if I can't go through that person's psyche and be that, I do think, as much as people want to say you're negative and the little jabs I make, like, you are inspiring to some degree. Like, do it. Like, hey, I'm here for you. I'm going to be your teacher, coach, mentor. And whether you're talking on your podcast or writing people comments, like, you're like, I believe in you. Like, just paint it. Who cares if it's shite, as you say, right? It's like, go for it. Jump off. Like, go big or go home. And I think the best successes I've had in getting people to having at least 100 figure armies plus, like 200, 300 figure armies, is I get them in through skirmish gaming, so they at least get some enjoyment out of it. So I see that as a benefit of it. Do you see, I know you don't mess with it at all, but do you see that as a benefit of like skirmish gaming, even in the UK? Is that another way that you've seen people get in? Has there been a guy that you've witnessed it's like he gamed 40K, went to maybe Too Fat Lardy's rule set, or played a game of Sharps, and they came over to your Napoleonic table? Like, is that the new way now in these skirmish games we have?
Yeah, for sure. I think although I will relentlessly take the mickey out of skirmish gaming on the podcast, it is a fantastic way to bring new people into the hobby, and an easily accessible one for a lot of people as well. But it's just, everything I do and the guests I have on are very much about my enthusiasm. So, for the big game, for history, for whatever it is, and I find it very difficult to be enthusiastic about something that I'm not interested in, and that's just me being honest. So, for me to, get somebody involved in I'll say bolt action because that's the big one. It's not something I'm interested in. It's not a style of gaming I would play. So for me to have a big bolt action player on, I'm going to get bored very quickly. And I'll probably say something that I don't want, that I shouldn't say. And I'll annoy the bolt action community, brackets again. I think that we each have our best bits, if you like, and for me, I would quite happily grab somebody walking past the big table, or somebody, I love this Ken, but I just play 20 20-figure games. I don't think I... Right, shut up, sit down. You're commanding them. I'll be back to you. And just encourage them through the game. And that's the way for me that I would do it. But that's because that's what I'm enthusiastic about. And I don't... some podcasts, and you guys certainly haven't done it, will kind of hit the big numbers through getting certain people on or talking about certain topics. And once that runs out, they've got nothing left to say. So you have to talk about what you're enthusiastic about, I think, or else the public and the listeners find you out very, very quickly. So yeah, skirmish gaming is great. I've got a couple of skirmish setups myself, but I struggle to find the skirmish in Italian wars, for example. Yep. You guys have done a bit of combat training. Would you skirmish with a pike?
No. There's a few ancient rule sets out there that use like the Macedonians or something, or phalanx with like 12 guys. And I'm like, what are we doing here? Just run around there.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Before we move on, I want Wyndehurst to take question 5 and 6, and then we'll move on to kind of our next session, because this ties into kind of what you were talking about. I totally agree with you on the genuineness. I think people who are genuine and their passion kind of shines through. I think that goes. I think you are the big game. I would say me and Wyndehurst fall in historical gaming and like trying to make it catch on here. And it's something that sometimes we feel like we're marching uphill. I don't want to, because I think this will tie into the next question. There's a lot of times where if I put World War II Germans on the table, because World War II platoon combat can normally get people over from 40K into, but then there's this, oh, you're Nazi, you do this and everything else. And I think this ties into our next question about positive and negative in the hobby. Strong opinions, right and wrong, and idiots, and how do you navigate that, and how should people navigate that? I think a lot of your last few episodes, for anybody that was doubting like your genuineness of like being a good human being and having a laugh with like some of the comments and things like that, like the Ken Hamming, I believe it's Ken Hamming episode.
Ken Hamming, yeah.
Ken Hamming, going through cancer, but showing how the hobby is just such a bedrock of that. Your tribute to Charlie, who Charlie is this like unsung hero, right? He is this person that is not at the forefront. He doesn't like to take the credit. He'll table you, as you say, but was just awesome. Like, so the positive and negative in the hobby, and the strong opinions, the right and wrong, and idiots, right? We all like to think. I love that quote. I can't remember what podcast. It might have been yours, in the sense of like, every gaming group has somebody that's just horrible to deal with, strong opinion, or maybe, not always great to deal with. And, if you're wondering who that person is in your group, it's probably you. If you can't play it, it's like, whoa. But with everything that you've kind of done in the trajectory of Yorkshire, and your laugh at maybe skirmish gaming, or your ability to like, hey, I'm trying to challenge people. I'm trying to get them to, this is what I enjoy. This is what do you think? Give the audience, listeners, viewers, like some tips on how to navigate that, and people, and just the noise maybe of online community that sometimes will say some heinous things because they're behind a computer screen and they don't have to talk to you in person. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, there is an immense bravery of both being out of range and anonymous. And there are people out there, and the more the podcast has grown, and the more other things that I've done has grown, the more people will try and come and have a go, which is fine. It's a free world. We have free speech, etc. But if you come at me with a comment, then you're going to get something back, and that's usually when they get upset. So, you guys are soldiers. In my line of work, I've seen the worst of the worst. I've been attacked with weapons. I've been threatened with firearms, etc. So you saying what you think is a really funny comment on the internet really doesn't bother me, because trust me, I've had a lot worse. So it is a tiny minority within our hobby, and if you try and do something like this, or anything where you're putting something out there on the internet, you are always going to have idiots out there who are going to try and make you feel small. And I don't understand why people do that, but it's their hit. So I did what has been seen as quite a controversial video on historical war games magazines, which I didn't think was that historic. Well, it wasn't that controversial whatsoever. But going back to what we were talking about earlier on, the people who got really angry about it just missed the point completely. And I said it at the start. I'm going to do this as a grumpy old war gamer, trying to remember, the golden day. So out of 300 odd comments on the YouTube, I think I had 6 negative, and 2 of those wrote for the magazine that I really had to go at, and that's fine. And I'm quite happy to enter in conversation with them until they get to the point where they're being personally abusive towards me. But I don't want to kind of focus on that because it's such a small section of the hobby. And as we, I've talked about it on other shows where it's always the one negative comment that you concentrate on. You could have 100 people saying, "This is brilliant. Oh, really enjoying this, Ken. Thank you very much." And then one person says you're a gatekeeping dickhead or whatever. And that's the one that you get upset about. So the ability to brush over it, the ability to kind of think, I'm coming up for 250,000 downloads, and you've
awesome.
got 6. You've got 6 followers on YouTube. So
The best one, because I know Ken won't mention it, but there was somebody that had a go at his painting, and he's like, Ken mentioned this on one of his last podcasts. Somebody had a go at his painting on like horses or something, and so Ken's like, "Oh, show me how then. Teach me. I'm teachable, And you've been a commissioned painter and highly successful in that realm." And the guy's like, "Well, I don't paint horses," or he wouldn't show you the eyes like they're crap. And so it was like, I've heard other podcasters that are just like, "Hey, I don't engage with comments and I don't do anything like that." I think there's something to be lost if you don't engage with the negative. Like me and Wyndehurst, obviously, like there's something that is totally lost if you're like, "Oh, I'm not going to read the comments at all." I enjoy how you are very approachable, like what you even said about Mark Hyde and like or Henry Hyde, the idea that you engage with that, and then as soon as the conversation takes a dark, ugly turn where there's not constructive criticism, let's say, then it's okay, now I'll pull up. All right, have a good life, or show me your horses, or whatever the case may be. I think that's a good one to follow. Before we go to those last 2 questions, I think that's a good way to navigate it. And for those that are posting their, even if you're not a content creator or you have the reach that Yorkshire does, I'll enjoy looking at your pictures of your first painted horse and mini that you just throw up on his group's page. even if people burn you alive, you're going to get a like and a thumbs up from me and just say keep digging, But that I do agree. That's a good way to navigate it, Ken. I think for everybody listening, and as we continue to be a social organization that posts stuff and ideas, like just be a decent human being. We have a rule, and at least in my unit, we've said it a lot. Be a genuinely good dude, and then the rest will like.
Have you heard the story of Palm Tree Man?
No.
Oh,
maybe I have. That sounds familiar.
Okay, so a long time ago, I was posting some pictures of some World War II desert games that we did, and we 1940 campaign, Britain and Italy, and this guy comes up on one of the forums and he goes, "There are no palm trees in the desert." And I kind of went, "What the fuck? What?" So anyway, I actually managed to find a picture of the Italian fort that the British were attacking on this particular day that we were recreating, and lo and behold, in the picture taken the day after the place was captured, are palm trees. So I post the picture up with the palm trees. I think you will find there are palm trees in the desert, and there are at this fort, and here they are. And then his response was an absolute classic. His response was, "I think you will find there are five palm trees in the photograph and 6 on your table."
Oh.
So from this day forward, from that day forward, and it still goes on today. If you look very, very careful at any Yorkshire Gamer table, regardless of period of history, location, or weather conditions, there is a palm tree on the table.
What about your AWI game? We call it American War of Independence, the ungrateful
Yeah,
colonial game that you played. Did you have a
yeah.
palm tree on that one?
Oh yes,
I gotta go back
always.
now and look at all the photos.
Yeah, you should start tagging that guy, like trolling him really bad at all the palm tree photos of your games.
Because I was looking at the Battle of Fornovo that I did, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, looking through the pictures, trying to pick one to put in a video, and there's a palm tree at one end of the table, and it just twigged straight away. Oh yeah, there we go. There's the palm tree. You you can't always see them, but they are there.
I love that idea. This makes me think of a phrase I've used it before too. And I think it's exuded in you and how you create the content, and you inspire people, and you get the big game out there. You take your passion very seriously, and you attack projects, and you take your passion, your job very seriously, but you don't take yourself seriously.
No,
And the
definitely
idea,
not.
exactly, and that still gives you this enjoyment and fun out of it, where no matter how many people want to come along and poo-poo it, like you're going to push it forward, you're going to be this, you are a positive. I think influence, regardless of what, some people will get hung up on the razzing and, well-natured, funny comments. And the idea is like, dude, we're playing with toy soldiers. This is for fun. Like we are having fun here. But no, I'll kick it over to Wyndehurst for any follow-ups on that, on navigating it. I really appreciated your response, and then he'll move on, I think, to the last two questions.
Yeah, so there was something else I think Kentuckian was alluding to, and from gaming with clubs over there, it doesn't seem to be quite as big an issue as we face over here, but I'm curious if you've experienced it. And a lot of it has to do with like Kentucky was saying, like, you want to do a World War II game. It's like, well, then somebody's like, well, you're playing Nazis or something. And like the last game I played before coming out of the UK was a huge Gettysburg, American Civil War. And they all looked at me like, oh, you should be the expert on gaming this. And I was like, well, actually, you don't see it gamed as often here because right now it's very controversial, the American Civil War. Have you experienced any of that, or like backlash from people maybe outside of the community, the wargaming community, like you're promoting violence or you're promoting this or that political agenda? And if you have, how have you navigated that? And for people who might experience that in the future.
Yeah, it's something I haven't encountered that much, although I am aware of it. And I think everyone has their own personal opinions on it, and there are some people who are totally against playing Germans in any way, shape, or form. They tend to be younger gamers, and I don't quite know where the hatred's coming from. My granddad would meet up with German veterans, and they were soldiers, and they fought on different sides. Whereas I had an uncle who was in Japan, and he wouldn't even look at anything Japanese. He hated them with a passion that would be considered to be racist today, but it was because of his experience in the jungle and the way that he interacted with Japanese soldiers that he just hated them and hated them forever. So, but that personal experience has kind of gone now, I would suggest. For me, I'll play Germans, I'll play SS, I'll play anything, and so long as it's within a historical context. So, the battles around Caen, on Normandy, the Battle of the Bulge, where the SS are a huge part of the German army, you're struggling to recreate it without going there. And that for me is fine. But if I walked in a SS uniform carrying a big banner, then that to me is too far. And I can understand why people would be angry with that. And there's a big thing in the UK about German reenactors at World War II events. But somebody's got to play the bad guys at the end of the day, haven't they? And you go back in history, and if you look at the Romans particularly, they weren't scared of killing off a few thousand people just to make an impression on a community so nobody's nice. And I think a lot of people I know in wargaming are maybe veterans, and they're all very keen to learn from learn through wargaming the mistakes of history rather than us repeating them in the future. So I would defend it if I was challenged with it and explain the reasons why. Some people just want to call you a Nazi or whatever just to get a rise or get a reaction, but they don't understand what we're trying to do. I'm trying to get more serious here for once, but we are remembering those lads and lasses who fought for our freedom in World War II and remembering them rather than just forgetting about it and shouting, rude words at everyone who might play the opposing side. I would rather remember the history, remember the people, and remember that we really shouldn't do this ever again.
Yeah, that's a
excellent
good way
point
to navigate it. Yeah, so moving to one of our last two questions. And we talked a little bit about this with manufacturers and stuff, but what do you see in the future of the hobby? So 3D printing could be a big risk to, the traditional manufacturer, but, what kind of, what do you see the direction of the hobby going in your experience?
I am more positive about the hobby than I've ever been.
That's good.
I think we are in an absolutely fantastic place, and that's all aspects of the hobby. I am very, very focused in what I do and what I talk about, but that doesn't mean that I don't want the rest of the hobby to flourish and do well. We've got so many people involved now coming from other areas. We've lost that, as we spoke about earlier, that negativity towards the hobby. Largely now, people are the people are sat in pubs talking about games that they're playing, and if they, if 20 years ago, if you were talking about I'm playing Risk at the weekend or whatever with a group of friends, nobody would blink an eyelid. But if you said, I'm going to play World War II wargaming with toy soldiers, you'd get funny looks. Whereas now, that pot is all mixed up, and everyone, if you said that, oh great, I've not seen that, can I try that? And I've seen that with friends who've crossed over from board games, as I said earlier on. So when I go to shows now, especially Salute this year, there was a huge different demographic there. There was lots of grumpy old war gamers like me, but there was families, and there was if you back in the 1980s, if you saw a woman at a war game show, you would think they were lost, and you would guide them wherever. Whereas now I'm seeing lots of women involved in the hobby who are really into it, and they're not just there because of a partner, they're there because they enjoy the game. They might be a painter or whatever, and we're getting that through YouTube as well, through different people getting involved. So to me, I think the war games industry will get bigger. I think that we will see it will change without a shadow of a doubt. It's changed in the 30 years or 40 years I've been involved in it. But I remember going to shows in the early 1980s when I was in my teens, and people going, the hobby's dying, it's all greying. And here I am 40 years later, greying myself. I'm not going bald, I'm just grey. It's not dying, it's better, and more people involved, and I think we're in a fantastic place.
And so, kind of following on that, since it is in a good place and we've been on a good trajectory, what can we as wargamers, what can companies, how can we continue on that? What are some good ideas or good advice? It's like, all right, we're on a good trajectory. Here's Ken's suggestion for keeping this trajectory, if you could think of any.
Step 1: abolish all wargame magazines. Banish. I'm kidding.
No, just one of them. No, that'll get me into trouble again. But that magazine, that magazine is evolving into a weird shit magazine, and that's fine. But what I said on that video, that was the miniature war games has said, right, we're going to do 50% of our magazine as sci-fi fantasy, 50% historical. I don't like it, but you've been honest with me. Thanks, guys. I know what I'm getting when I open up the magazine. Whereas, others are going steadily over to more and more and more and more fantasy content without saying this is what we're going to do. And when contacted about Charlie Wesencraft, they didn't even know who he was, which to me is very, very bad. So sorry, Rob, I've gone. My mind's gone again. Where were we?
Well, no. So the question was like, how should we navigate to keep on that trajectory? So transparency sounds like a good one. If things are evolving and changing, let's be transparent with each other and business models. It's like, if we're a company getting away from metals, here's why we're going to go to plastics and maybe 3D print stuff, and being transparent with each other.
Yeah, what we can do is kind of what we're reliant on individuals within our hobby to promote it. Let's take baseball, for example, in the States. If you've got an overarching body, MLB, Major League Baseball, they push it for everyone. So you've got an overarching body, if you like. We don't have a World Association of Wargaming to push the hobby. So we're kind of all reliant on people like yourselves, myself, Henry, Alex Sutherland, all these people who do content to be positive about what they do and try and get, there'll be an aspect of the hobby that people might pick onto, that they'll get into it. And that's really what we as individuals can do. And in the UK, it's not new, but we've seen recently things like the Two Fat Lardies doing displays at not wargaming events, but historical events. There's a really big podcast in the UK called We Have Ways of Making You Talk, which is World War II based. And they have this huge event over a weekend with, like, I don't know, tens of thousands of people go to it. And the Two Fat Lardies put on a wargaming display there. And that's the way that we get people into the hobby, is reaching outside our comfort zone and putting things on, like you did with the Air Force thing that you did with the where you work, the training tool. There are going to be people who pick that up and go into wargaming, and as a result of it. But then they're clearly interested in military stuff. I hope so. If they're in the military, they need a quick wake up. You don't suddenly wake up and go, "Whoa, I'm in the Marines. How did that happen?" You're kind of there because you want to be. So you've got that interest. And if you're in a museum, you've got an interest in history. And it's just a case of us as wargamers just trying to stretch ourselves a little bit and put a display on in the museum or something along those lines, and just pick away at those people who maybe cross our Venn diagram with their interest in history.
Yeah, that's good.
Right, perfect. Could not said it better. Like, that was a great answer. You heard it here first, kids. Ken is going to run at your local library in Yorkshire. He's going to run an Italian Wars game come out. It's going to be, he'll post the dates later on his page. A bunch of little 8-year-olds picking up units of pike. I'm sure they'll be... No, I'm kidding.
No, because I've got real pikes on my pike block, so there'll be a bunch of 8-year-olds with hands like colanders.
But no, what a great answer. And before we move, our last two sections are going to be our kit bag and then our scouting report. Just wanted to say before we move to that, thanks, Ken, for everything. It's been amazing. Listen to his podcast. That's going to be awesome stuff. The guy you had on from Early War Miniatures, I love that episode. I look forward to his new stuff. Yeah, Paul with the Isle of Wight raid. Like, if you listen to Yorkshire podcast, you will have a good time. Highly recommend it to those people. Our and thanks, Ken. Nobody said the word faction. Nobody said the word. If I ever get stationed in the UK or make it over there, I'm gonna just go to people in the crowd at Salute or Partisan, and I'm gonna wind them up and get them to go talk to you. Like, yeah, he really loves talking about the Papal faction in Church Crusade. Like, go talk to him about that one, or go talk.
But if I
But
could, if I could just tell you a funny story about Salute
send it.
that I wasn't aware of, but apparently there was a guy there selling loads and loads of dice. So I wasn't aware of it. Loads of people went up to him and said, "Have you got any round dice?" And he didn't. And somebody went up at the end, towards the end of the day, and he was really shirty with it. He said, I haven't got any round dice." So I don't know whether he's gone away thinking that there's a massive market out there for round dice and sunk his entire family fortune into them, thinking he's going to make $1 million, or whether he listens to the podcast and he kind of gets it. But
Yeah, you need to. A lot of the big games I've played in, they give out MVP trophies, and you should give. You should give out like an MVP trophy. Then you should give out like a best sport, or maybe like person that had the wooden spoon award should be like either a wet palette or a round dice. That's what you should give to people. Be like, hey, you did so bad today, or your dice were crap.
Yeah.
Like, try this, or just try painting minis. Don't play anymore. But no, that's awesome. We talked to Ken a little bit earlier on the podcast, and now as we transition to our last two segments on Kit Bag, we're trying to make historical wargaming, great. We wanted to get back and rooted. We feel like that's me and Wyndehurst. We're pretty transparent with our directive, and hey, we enjoy it. The water's fine. Just like you heard Ken, there's a lot of different facets to wargaming, whether it's the big games, skirmish games, a period, it's a lot of stuff into it. And we love sharing, and we get a lot of people that share with us, and even Ken gracious enough to give us his time today. One of the things is with Kit Bag is we always try to what are the secrets or tips of the trade, and how this is what I've used and be successful. And then a callback to an earlier episode of Kit Bag, we did really useful boxes, and where I got that from was I saw Ken's episode on how he stored his pikes and how he stored his armies, and it just caught on. And so today, especially with me and Wyndehurst, we wanted to talk shelving. And so our kind of the generic shelving that are like under $80, somewhere around in there, that you can get at Lowe's, Walmart, and Sam's Club. And I'll pan to it right now with my great camera crew. You can store your hobby, you can keep it up in there, but it's especially for those where you game at your house or you game at a local store. I used to have a huge curio cabinet. Wyndehurst has seen it, glass case. Had to put every army in there. I wanted it to be like a museum and diorama. And then every time I went to go play, that wasn't at my house. And even at my house, had to take them out. And it just became a big, beautiful to look at. And 90% of the time, that you don't have it on the table. It's awesome in a curio cabinet. But I opted the really useful boxes. You can see through them on these, whatever you have. But the shelving that you can easily transition just really helps making it, especially for me and Wyndehurst, who are moving around every 2 or 3 years, and we're gypsies, in the hobby. We got to pack up all our stuff and go. But Ken wanted to, kick it to you, and then Wyndehurst will have some comments on the shelving. But what, with the big game, means lots of minis, lots of terrain, and everything else that I know you've got in your collection. Whoever lives in Yorkshire as well, a building inspector needs to come over to his house, especially if it's in the attic. The weight of his Napoleonics and everything else he's got up there is probably going to end up getting somebody hurt someday with the thousands of pounds of lead he has. But what do you use, Ken, to it sounds like you're not, you're going places when you're gaming. So what's the shelving, what's the storage kind of look like in Yorkshire Gamer's place?
Well, I do have a friend who had to have his ceiling reinforced due to the weight of his figures, so I am very familiar with that story. Most of my figures are in really useful boxes, and what I've done is I've put shelving underneath my table, and the boxes of figures and terrain all sit under there, and that has kind of expanded over the years as I've got more and more and more. And luckily, my collection got too big for my wargames room when our kids moved out. So I've just carried on into the next room, which is now a big storage room. But very similar to yourself, I have a limited amount of stuff on display. There's a shop called IKEA in the UK. I don't know you have in the US, and they do this thing called the Billy cabinet, and it's a wooden cabinet with a glass front. And wooden shelves. Glass would just shatter with the weight. And I've got some of my older collections in there. My original Napoleonics and that sort of stuff are in there. But there is that compromise between doing that and then, as you say, taking stuff to shows or your mates to play games. So I tend to stick with the really useful boxes now, and the main place is under the table. But then, as I move into this other room, there's a little cubby hole in there that I've not put shelves in. I've just stacked on the floor.
That begs the question then. Most people are thinking, oh, a 6x4 table, like I can fit. What is the table in your room? I say nothing less than an 8-footer. What is the table in your
12x6 is the table in my room, which is it's about 11 and 5 foot 11 and 3/8 by because when I got the boards, and I chipped one of the edges, so I had to slightly shave it, and then I had to slightly shave all the other ones so that they were all the same width. So yeah, it's some weird size, but 12x6 within an inch is probably about right.
If anybody's played Ken from a scenario book where it was like a 12-foot table, I want you to, Ken didn't win. You were probably cheated. He shaved. My troops deployed a half inch forward when they shouldn't have. No, I'm kidding. But that 12-foot table, man, that's impressive. I'm thinking like dozens of really useful boxes are under that thing. Then it's got to be.
It's kind of waist height, and I would say that you get. I like the 11-liter one is the one I use the most, and I probably got about 10 or 11 of those fit under each section of the table, and it's quite good actually because I built the table 26 years ago. And although I did get a prize at school for woodwork, it started to show its age now. So there are parts of the table that are held up by really useful boxes.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Just kick it out if you're losing the game. If you're like, oh, my table collapsed. I guess it's a draw. Like we'll shake hands on a draw. But no, that's awesome. The Wyndehurst, with any other thoughts kind of on shelving?
So I've got the same ones actually that Kentuckian did. These weren't available when I was in the US the last. They just didn't exist. It's really just shown the advancement in, I guess, plastic manufacturing. And really, so before that, the most common ones we had were those metal shelves with like the particle board inserts. And I guess it's taking the same trajectory as our hobby. That went from metal to now these plastics. And it was actually so nice to put together because even the attachment accessories were on a sprue, like a plastic sprue that you had to cut off. And it was just like, wow, this is like just a big bottle putting together. But my problem is I've got a lot of really useful boxes to go on all the shelves, but most of my hobby stuff is in boxes with foam because I had to come all the way from the UK to over here. So I got to get it back into boxes, and hopefully it'll be the last time they go into plastic boxes and stay there. But are you thinking about putting any shelving in that storage room, or because I found when I was in the UK, I just stacked all my really useful boxes. Then inevitably you need the box that's on the bottom for this next game.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, let me take these 5 off here, put them down to get the 1 out. Now I can't get out of the closet because I put the 5 behind me. You have any problems like that? And and how are you getting around storing that stuff?
Is shelving ever going to go in that extra room?
Potentially. It's a tough one, and like you say, it is always the box at the bottom of the pile that's required. But I don't. I really don't mind. The stuff that's stacked underneath the table is stacked that way as well. So in an ideal world, I would do it, but in the current world, and I think in any future world or alternative reality, that I would just go, you know what, I could paint 8 figures while I'm doing that. So I'll probably paint the figures.
Well, I've learned this with the moving, and I know like my dad does it as well because he has, lots of, your collection is vast. Me and Wyndehurst have pretty big collections, and it is fun sometimes, maybe a forcing function to like get games or models out you haven't played with or painted in years and be like, oh, this is, maybe that's it's
like a new army.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, this is Christmas. So no, that's awesome. Great kit bag. We asked the listener and viewer out there, and we've heard a lot of good comments like, hey, as far as shelving goes, like kind of what's in your kit bag. You've heard from Ken with the IKEA thing, as well as, his storage. What do you use for storage, especially with boxes? And how you stacking that along the walls, under tables? What's a easy button? Please post that on our group and page and give us some insight into that. I'll kick it back to Wyndehurst for our last section of the day.
Yeah, so scouting report, we're looking at just what's coming up ahead for you. For me, just finished setting up the house. I haven't quite finished setting up my hobby space down in the basement, but as soon as it's done, it's my Syracuse Greek army. It's not going to be quite the size for a big game that Ken would push for, but it's going to be about 600 to 800 figures for Punic Wars. I just figured the Greeks, they got to fight everybody. Syracuse does, so they're a good one to pick up. So that's the first big army. And as people have seen on Facebook, I am trying to get back into 3D printing. So I've got an FDM printer, for terrain and stuff, and I'm going to dabble in some resin stuff. Though I don't have. Kentuckian was asking me like, what are you thinking about? What do you want to buy miniatures wise? It's like, well, I don't really have any big army projects that I don't already have everything for, just not painted yet. So I don't know how much stuff I'll print with the resin printer. It'll probably just a
famous last words.
Yeah.
The nice thing for me, like with my Greeks, is I'm not bothered by mixing models of different manufacturers. They don't all have to be the same exact scale. So that collection's, a whole bunch of plastics from different companies and metals from different companies. So I'll probably throw in some resin stuff if I need to fill in gaps. But that's like the near thing. And then, Kentucky and I are talking about what cons coming up in the next year, the two of us can get at now that I'm back stateside. So that's the scouting report for me. What about you, Ken? And then Kentuckian, you can finish us off and sign us off.
Yeah, I am relatively disciplined when it comes to painting and stuff. And I mentioned it earlier on as the cycle. So something that I've just introduced over the last few months is like a little palette cleanser. So I paint my horses in oils, and I will paint 100 or 150 horses in one go, which means that I have boxes and boxes full of horses that are painted with unpainted riders. So what I do is I tend to rotate through different things. So at the moment, my rotation, I've got on the table at the moment, I've got an Italian War shot unit for the Bradford City Pipe Block that I'm just finishing off. And then as a palette cleanser, I'll do 6 cavalry. And I've got some Arab Crusades cavalry that I'm working on at the moment. Then I'll do a Napoleonic unit, and within that, I alternate between French and Prussian. Then I'll do another 6 cavalry, and then back round to the Italian Wars, 6 cavalry, Napoleonic, and just that's the current cycle. So I tend to do my painting in that style, and I'm planning to do the Battle of Narvik at Salute this year. So that's a big terrain project, and I'll find out very, very shortly whether I'm going to be retiring at the end of November, which would be absolutely perfect, because that will then give me 3-4 months to get these massive fjord sides done. All the ships are done. It's just the terrain that needs doing. So that could be my big project next year. And then I've got, on top of that, there's always something going on. On top of that, I've got two friends. One friend passed away and left me all his stuff, and another friend has donated his English Civil War army. So I've got two huge English Civil War armies that need amalgamating into one force that looks the same with the same basing. There's a few pikes that need adding and a few flags that need adding. So that's kind of, I think that's going to be my next year's summer project. But yeah, I'm always planning ahead. And there's things I'm thinking about maybe 3 or 4 years in the future.
Oh, that's excellent. The short term for me is again my process of like where we've just moved. Both of us have moved to different locations in the States based on our jobs, and so I've reached out. I'm going to start reaching out to hobby stores. I'm going to start trying to run some kind of demo games, historical demo games, see if I can get any people to bite, and then next thing you know, hopefully I've created a league or whatever the case may be to try to see how the scene is. There seems to be some pretty good historical wargaming groups that are about an hour, 2 hours from me. That I look forward to the guys down in Richmond at Waterloo Games and some other places. I look forward to getting at near DC. There's a bunch of decent groups. As far as the project table that'll speed into that, I am really kind of stuck on Ancients. Ancient Combat. I just finished right before I left the 101st Airborne. I painted a World War II 101st Airborne Army, and it was awesome to be there on the ground and take dirt from actual sites and base it with my models. But don't tell the French people that. But the big thing that I really hope to get some pretty deep runs made on. I've got Caesarian Romans that I've gotten all together. They're all primed and ready to go. And I've got some Macedonians sitting in the wings. I have all my Gallic cavalry to finish off. And but I will say a friend had told me, and I'm bad at this. I try to stay regimented, right? Disciplined, Ken, like quit effing about and painting it. But I'm here in the epicenter of the American Civil War in Charlottesville. So the first battle is not too far away from me. They're at Manassas, and I'm a stone's throw away from a lot of these battles, and it's really making me itch to get my ACW back on the table, my French and Indian stuff, or American War of Independence, or Ungrateful Colonial War, whatever you want to call it. But I look forward to kind of getting that. So I'm going to leave some room. That inspires me as I always try to hey, this is my regimented project. This is what I'm going to go. I'm going to get these Caesarians done by X month. But I'm going to try to pad in there some room to hey, I'm going to paint a brigade of Union or a brigade of Confederates. Or I'm going to I'll pad some of that time to help me to, as you said, a palate cleanser, rotate. And I'm not just, my eyes are going gray. So we'll see how that goes. And some of the local cons in Virginia that are coming up, I'm going to try to get a big game going on. So maybe I've got two armies that are should be about 1,000 minis on the table, and maybe we can get Wyndehurst come down here and help me with it. But for my Punic War stuff, that I think would be a good sized game, and I hope to hopefully be hosting some big games at cons rather than at the store or the club, but getting it out here more on the table. Inspired by you, Ken. I really want to see how that goes. And then that's about it. I'm sure in about a week's time, I'll be chasing some other butterfly or something, but we'll see. I wanted to say kind of last comments, parting shots, and anything that you have, Ken, as well. But truly appreciate you being here, giving us the time of day. Feel like I know you because I've listened to so many podcasts. Who are these banks talking to you, and how does he know about Mashi Peas? But truly, I think you're a juggernaut in the hobby. I like how you navigate the negativity that comes at the laughs and stuff that you do to try to, again, I think that's a staple of who you are, and the genuineness is you take your passion very seriously, but you don't take yourself seriously. And so it sees the interviews you did with Ken, the Charlie tribute, all of that is just awesome, and it's good for record keeping. I'm going to be a lifelong listener, viewer, and I wish you the best in that passion. And thanks for, again, giving us a tip of the cap when we first started to try to, I don't want people in the States playing Trench Crusade or Jousting Chickens. There's these generals that really existed, these battles that really happened that they should learn about. And I really, that was our goal here, is to like, hey, let's bring historical wargaming back. Let's people get into this and be involved in your history. And the world's older than 200 years. Most Americans might not know that. So we'll see how it goes. But again, just truly appreciate you being here, Ken. And if you have any parting comments, if not, we'll sign off.
No, wonderful guys. Thank you very much for I'll sit and talk wargaming anytime for any amount. I just love it. I think it's a fantastic hobby, and there's so many wonderful people in it. And good on you two guys for getting your podcast together and talking about things that you're passionate about, because that's how this hobby will grow. People like yourselves getting involved and pushing yourself out there, like I did. It was a reaction to other podcasts. Yes, it was a negative reaction, but it got me out there and it got me doing stuff. And I think, we can get fixated on this gatekeeper thing with historicals. And, my argument back has always been that if you do 40k, you have to learn the lore, LORE. And if you're Tyranid, Deathcopter, Megabus, helicopter, whatever, is the wrong colour, somebody will tell you. So don't say to me that we're gatekeeping when we ask people to just know a little bit of history, and know that the SS aren't a cool faction with great weapons and a +1 to shoot. They're a nasty piece of guys, and you need to know about them before you put them on the table.
Oh, excellent point, Ken. Truly appreciate it. So without further ado, again, to the viewer and listener, go check out Yarkshire Gamer, his group, his page, his blog, his YouTube, and his podcast. They are amazing. They are definitely, he's a long form podcast, and I think you'll enjoy the discussion. Some of the inside UK jokes I still won't get, but I'll message Ken from here on out to try to, Ken, what did you mean by this? Thanks again, and truly appreciate it. So without any further ado, thank you to our viewer. Please comment, give us feedback. What do you think? Anything that we discussed today, if you have other points, counterpoints, please post them up on the group page on YouTube. Comment, like, subscribe, as always. Until we meet again, please grab your spear, your shield, your belt-fed machine gun, and join us on the next episode of On Patrol. This is Fightin Kentuckian.